In the first season, our story concluded with a somber funeral following the tragic all-student praxis incident. 11 professors lost their lives, but miraculously, all students survived. The perpetrators' wanted posters have been circulated, but there's still no solid lead. For the 6th-year academy students, though, there's no time to mourn. Their final exams have begun, and the first hurdle, the written exam, is upon them. Will Serholt, with a total of 5,817 credits, is still 1,383 credits short of the requirement to ascend the tower. The next day, the Academy is buzzing with news of Will achieving perfect scores in all subjects. 2 students are overheard gossiping about how a non-magic user like Will could possibly graduate and ascend. Meanwhile, Professor Edward watches from afar, his gaze sharp and seemingly displeased. In his office, Professor Werkner is elated by Will's achievement. Professor Elisa joins him, congratulating him on the success of his student. However, Werkner cautions that there's still a long way to go and nothing is certain until the very end. Meanwhile, Will is studying in the library with Colette by his side. She's worried about him overworking himself. Despite looking exhausted, Will remains determined, knowing that the final written exam is tomorrow. Rosti arrives and points out that Will already has enough credits to graduate. Will confirms this, but insists on continuing his studies, as he only needs 1 more credit to ascend the tower. His total credits now stand at 7199, just 1 short of the required 7200. The scene shifts to the Academy library, where Colette arrives with dinner for Will. She finds him fast asleep from studying too hard. Seeing Will vulnerable, Colette leans in to kiss him. But before she can, Rosti appears behind her, startling her. Flushed, Colette claims she was only trying to cover Will with a blanket. She expresses her concern for Will's ambition to become a magia vendor. Will is always getting beaten up chasing after Elfaria, but Elfaria is just waiting at the top of the tower. The next day was the final written exam. The students began to grumble as Professor Edward, known for his difficult exams, was to be the proctor for the last test. Soon, Professor Edward entered the room and demanded everyone to quiet down. He announced that there would be only 1 question on the final exam, worth 6 credit points. He then distributed the exam papers to each student using magic. When the papers were opened, they found a simple question: what is magic? The question asked for a written description of the process of using magic, including how a wizard connects with their magical power. They had to put their feelings into words. This question would be easy for wizards and elves, but difficult for those who had never used magic, as they wouldn't know what it felt like. In other words, it would be difficult for Will, who couldn't use magic. Will felt despair. He admitted he couldn't answer the question and was sure to fail the exam, thus dashing his promise to Elfaria. However, remembering Elfaria's face, he regained his spirit. He poured all his knowledge and experience about magic into the exam paper. After the exam, Professor Werkner immediately went to Professor Edward's room. Angrily, Professor Werkner asked what was the point of giving such a question on the final exam. Professor Edward replied that he was merely asking the most basic question that any wizard aspiring to reach the tower should know. He added that it was unfortunate that only 40% of the students could answer the question correctly. Professor Werkner shouted in anger, "That kind of question is aimed squarely at one specific student. As a professor, how can you do something that absurd?" Professor Edward pushed Professor Werkner to the ground, saying, "The ones being absurd are you guys. What are you trying to accomplish by letting someone who can't use magic go up the tower? What could he possibly do in the graveyard of wands? Do you intend to use him as a guinea pig? You fool, this is no laughing matter. In this world of magic, a sword can never become a wand. Something's wrong with you guys, both you and the principal, wresting a dream that will never came true from his grasp. That's the least I could do to ease his suffering." With this, Will only achieved a total of 7,199 credits, and his qualification to advance to the tower was not met. That night, Will was consumed by despair after failing to advance to the tower. Overwhelmed by disappointment, he chose to be alone in a quiet garden. A while later, Rosti approached him, saying that he had repaired Will's glasses and left them in his room, hoping it would lift his spirits. However, Will remained unresponsive, his mind preoccupied with his failure. After a moment, Will finally spoke, his voice trembling. He said that Professor Edward was the worst, and there was no way a student like him could answer that question. He felt it was so unfair. The words seemed to burst out of him, accompanied by tears streaming down his face, reflecting a deeper pain than he could express. Seeing his friend so down, Rosti tried to comfort him, saying that he might not know how much this meant to him, but that he would always be there for Will. However, it only caused Will to cry even harder, unable to contain his deep disappointment. Meanwhile, in the academy, Colette was searching for Will. She asked Lehanna and Wignall if they had seen him. Lehanna explained that she and Wignall had searched everywhere, but there was no sign of Will. Wignall speculated that Will might be outside the academy. Colette became increasingly worried. She wondered where Will had gone, her mind filled with unspoken fears. Soon, Julius appeared and sarcastically said that students who failed to advance to the tower often lost their spirit and left the academy. For him, searching for someone he considered incompetent was a waste of time. Suddenly, Wignall stopped in his tracks, pointing his wand directly at Julius' face. Wignall demanded that Julius retract his insulting words about an elf's friend. Julius was undeterred. He knocked Wignall's wand away, stating that this was a magic academy, and in this world, magic was everything. No matter how great Will was in the dungeon, there was no place for a sword like him. Soon, Shaun arrived with a cynical look at Julius. Julius asked what was with that look. Wasn't he also considering Will an enemy? Shaun agreed, saying he was really annoyed because he wanted to defeat Will with his own hands, but now he wouldn't have the chance anymore, and it made him sick. In the midst of the heated argument, Professor Werkner suddenly appeared, asking what was going on. Colette explained that they were looking for Will but couldn't find him. With a calm demeanor, Professor Werkner asked them to stop searching, as he would look for him himself, and instead, he asked them to relax and enjoy the last night of the year at the Terminaria celebration. That night was filled with merriment. In the sky, an elite high mage named Wistoria greeted everyone enthusiastically as the host of the event. With a playful tone to lighten the mood, she introduced herself as a 26-year-old virgin mage from the tower. She reminded everyone of the importance of the Terminaria festival, a festival where the Great Barrier protecting the sky is recreated. Long ago, mankind had no knowledge of the sky, and this world was enclosed in darkness. With the invaders from the heavens spreading destruction throughout the land, a great many lives were lost, and right when despair seemed to have engulfed everyone, under the command of our progenitor, the Magic Queen Mercedes, 5 great mages sealed off the sky, repelling the invaders. On this day, 500 years ago, the Great Barrier made by the Magia vendor created a boundary separating them from the heavens that continues to protect them to this day. Everyone greatly enjoyed the festive night with its merriment, unaware of the danger that would soon target them. In the midst of the merriment, Iris stood with a worried face. Thinking about the failure of the festival that was about to happen, she prayed that everything would go smoothly. Below, Lodge Holland from the Flame faction communicated seriously with Iris. Lodge reported that nothing suspicious was found on land, then asked about the situation in the sky. Iris assured him that the sky was also safe and the event could continue. As the clock neared midnight, 5 members of the Magia vendor stepped onto the stage. The crowd's cheers filled the air, welcoming the Magia vendor who had already taken the stage. Sarah spoke to the crowd, realizing that there might be those out there who were disappointed and drowning in despair. However, she asked everyone to lift their heads, because the threat of the heavenly invader still lurked in this world. Sarah asked them to raise their wands and help defend the sky, and the Magia vendor began to chant the spell Grand Technique, Wendy's Terminaria, creating a magic circle that formed a great barrier. However, suddenly a black writing appeared in the air from Hitless that read, Happy New Year. The merriment of that night immediately vanished, replaced by a chilling silence. At the same time, numerous magic circles appeared in the sky. Lodge, panicked, immediately instructed his subordinates to find the source of those magic circles. Soon after, Dinobulo's monsters emerged from all the newly created magic circles in the air. the monsters brutally attacked the city, destroying everything in their path. From a building, Mars and Hitless watched the chaos they had created. Mars stated that the Magia vendor's magic power had been drained after they created the Great Barrier earlier, and for the time being, they would be unable to do anything. Hitless added that this was the beginning of the slaughter party they had planned. Amidst the chaos, Will, who had previously been immersed in his depression, looked up at the sky and saw the appearing magic circles. He recognized it as the same circle he had seen on the 15th floor of the dungeon. Realization dawned on him that something terrible was happening. Meanwhile, in the city, the unprepared residents ran around in panic, trying to save themselves. They wondered why the monsters from the dungeon could appear on the surface. Seeing the worsening situation, Sarah quickly acted. She decided to create a protective wall by summoning her guardian, hoping it could help deal with the threat. At the same time, Lodge gave an order to all his troops to start chanting a spell, focusing on destroying the monsters in front of them. With Lodge's command, the troops simultaneously launched a fire magic attack on Dinobolos, creating a massive explosion. Indeed, this was the extraordinary power of the high mages of the tower. Feeling confident that they had defeated Dinobolos, Lodge ordered his troops to track down the magic circles and capture the person responsible for this chaos. However, when the smoke from the attack cleared, Dinobolos was still standing unharmed. Lodge was shocked to see the monster unscathed, and disbelief was evident on his face. Fueled by anger, Lodge attacked again with his strongest magic, but the attack was easily parried by Dinobolos. Confusion and frustration enveloped Lodge as he realized that his magic had no effect. With rage, Lodge tried to attack once more, but suddenly Sarah shouted, warning him to stay away. Unfortunately, Lodge was too late to realize it, and in an instant, Dinobolos slashed his body in two. The horrific event left everyone stunned in fear and despair. Dinobolos laughed contentedly as if enjoying the ongoing chaos. Lodge's troops, realizing that their magic was useless against Dinobolos, began to panic and flee the battle. From the sky, Sarah was stunned and could only ponder as she realized that magic was useless against the monsters. Moreover, her guardian had also been destroyed, making her feel disbelief in this situation. In her confusion, Dinobolos suddenly appeared from behind, trying to finish her off. Luckily, Sarah managed to dodge in time. From that attack, Sarah realized something. If the monsters were carrying mage killer swords, weapons capable of neutralizing magic. Quickly, Sarah reported this crucial information to Headmaster Cauldron through her communication channel. Cauldron concluded that the mage killer swords received from Finn had been mass-produced. He also began to realize that this attack seemed too planned to be carried out by one person. Their target was clearly the Magia vendor. Realizing this, Cauldron prohibited sending reinforcements to the city. She ordered her subordinates to protect the tower at all costs, realizing that the chaos in the city was just a diversion. Meanwhile, inside the tower, the Magia vendor just sat idly by, watching the disaster unfold. Eleanor, with a skeptical look, expressed that this was the Terminaria Day, the only day when they were truly weak. She wondered who was the fool who dared to plan this attack at such a perfect moment. Logwell, unable to bear the situation, stated that they had to act and show the power of the Magia vendor to save many lives. However, before he could finish his sentence, Noah stopped him coldly. He warned Logwell not to take foolish actions that would only tarnish his reputation. Zio then asked Noah about the next step. Noah firmly ordered all Magia vendor not to leave this place. He emphasized that losing even one Magia vendor would cause the Great Barrier to collapse, which would allow the heavenly invaders to descend to Earth and turn the whole world to ash. Meanwhile, outside the tower, the villains were annoyed that the Magia vendor had not come out yet. Mars commented that the bait they had prepared should be enough to lure them out, and if they dared to come out, they would be immediately killed. Hitless calmly replied, "Then let's enjoy it, this spectacle." Amidst the increasing chaos, Iris felt confused and didn't know what to do to save everyone. In the midst of her anxiety, she looked back and saw a mother trapped under the rubble of a building, while her child stood beside her, waiting anxiously. Unfortunately, a Dinobolos monster approached them. Without hesitation, Iris cast her magic to protect them, but the magic was easily deflected by Dinobolos. The monster continued to approach and intended to finish off the mother and child. Iris screamed in despair. But suddenly, the monster's hand was severed. The presence of a young man who could cut off Dinobolos' hand made Mars and Hitler silent. The young man was none other than Will Serfort. Without saying a word, Will immediately slashed Dinobolos' body until it was shattered. And in an instant, the monster that had previously been invincible to the high mages was easily chopped to pieces by Will. After taking down Dinobolos, Will's hands wouldn't stop shaking. He pressed them together and muttered to himself, begging them to stop trembling. If he let fear take over, countless people would die. In silence, Will kept wrestling with his fear, but the moment he saw lives in danger, he couldn't stay still. Rosti came running up, telling Will to focus on the monsters using weapons, but at the same time, another monster lunged at him from the side. Noticing it, Rosti immediately unleashed his magic, bringing the creature down. He then gave further instructions for Will to target the monsters wielding swords, while the mages dealt with those without weapons. Will understood, and instantly dashed toward a Dinobolos. The clash of their powers collided head-on, sending a massive shockwave sweeping across the battlefield. Even though his body was far smaller, Will pressed forward, and with a single brutal slash, he split the monster clean in two. Watching from afar, Iris stood frozen in place, stunned by the sight of Will defeating a monster on his own. But the shock soon gave way to doubt, as she remembered just how many monsters were still out there. Suddenly, she got a message from Magia Vander, Aaron Masteria's old king, telling her that he delegated his authority to her. She needs to mobilize the dwarves and stop the savagery going on. Iris thanked him, and her voice started to appear in every corner of the city, telling them that she, on behalf of the great Mastelius Noah the Watcher, she issues this order. Gode Vel, which means that the prohibition on dwarves taking up arms has been lifted. Mages are to work together with the dwarves to wipe out the monsters. At the same time, we see Werkner getting into the tavern, and he start begging the dwarves to lend them their strength. One of the dwarves said that he can't believe that they are making them work so early into the new year. Then all the dwarves took their arms and start going to the war. Near the academy dorms, Edward cut down a monster with his magic, then ordered the students to leave the armed monsters to the dwarves. They were to target the rest, contribute to the battle in any way they could. They didn't need to win, only stall them, becoming the wands that protected the people. A bunch of students grumbled, saying that even if they were told to contribute, what could they possibly do against opponents capable of killing even high mages? Suddenly an arc of lightning slid through the monsters. It was Lehanna, casting her spell. As she attacked, Lehanna realized that even with enchanted magic, she couldn't bring them down in a single blow. Worse, once she got within a certain distance of the monster's weapon, her magic began to fizzle out. She didn't know whether it nullified magic or absorbed it, but either way, it was deadly for mages. Then she noticed Colette rushing toward her, and Lehanna calmly issued a direct order for her to follow her instructions. Meanwhile, Ignar cast his spell right into the monster, but it was cleaved into ash. Ignar realized that it could nullify even phantasmagoric magic. Julius told him that there was no way they could hold out until the dwarves arrived. Once Lehanna ran out of juice and could no longer hold the monster's attention, they would all be killed. They had no choice but to flee. Cian refused to do so, and noted that the enemy's movements slowed down for a moment when erasing magic. In that case, they needed to fire off as many spells as they could. 3 magical forces converged on a single monster, but the sword-wielding creature immediately deflected the assault, nullifying their magic. However, Cian quickly called Colette and told her that it was the right time. She then cast a spell on the statue of the former Magia Vander, Viola. The statue collapsed onto the monsters and killed them all. Ignar pointed out that objects without any magic flowing through them couldn't be nullified. Realizing this trick worked, Lehanna told everyone to start throwing stones or whatever they could at the monsters, while ordering the earth mages to lay down a barrage. Seeing a spark of hope forming, the students began to get their spirit back. From above, Sarah noticed this and thought that the students accepted this year were very talented. She would award them full marks. Then she told everyone in the city to fight back, with the earth mages taking the lead. The dwarves would be here soon. Meanwhile, in the minds of the mages, there was some annoyance about having to rely on the dwarves' help, but they really had no other choice. Before long, the dwarves started showing up. On the roof, the Headless told Mars that things were going as expected at Rig Arden Magical Academy. Mars said it was frustrating that those idiots manufacturing the mage killers had happened to cross paths with the expedition. The mage killers had been recovered by the mysterious Noah, and the little one in question. The Headless noted that not only had they been quick to throw the dwarves into the battle, but some of the mages had also responded surprisingly fast. Information about their trump card had already circulated. Mars said that if the upper college analyzed the mage killers and came up with a countermeasure, it would be a disaster. Even though they still couldn't mass-produce many of them, they had been forced to accelerate their plans. If their cards hadn't been exposed, they would have launched a perfect surprise attack. When the Headless saw Will cutting down monsters like they were easy targets, he told Mars that it seemed there was another reason as well. But he had no other choice. It was time to use the ace up his sleeve. Then a gate opened near Will. Will started to wonder if something was going to emerge again, but instead, a new kind of monster appeared with a large eye in the middle of its head. The creature began searching for prey, before its gaze locked onto Will. In an instant, the monster was right in front of him and sent Will flying with a punch to the stomach. The force of the blow was overwhelming, hurling Will through 3 buildings. The sudden sight left the mages who witnessed it in shock, while Will lay amid the rubble, blood spilling from his mouth. The scene shifted to the dungeon, where Finn slowly approached a man sitting on the ground. With a grin, he said that this game of cat and mouse was over and asked if they were the ones who created the mage killers, ordering him to tell everything he knew. The man burst out laughing and said there was no point. Their role had only been to lure him deeper into the dungeon, and by now, the surface had already been destroyed. This information hit Finn hard. He kicked the man until he was dead. At the city square, the injured Will pushed himself up, but before he could even get out of the building, the monster swooped in and threw out a nasty slash. Will got blasted through several walls, and by the end of it he almost dropped from a crazy height. Luckily, he jammed his sword down just in time to land safely. Staring at the monster in front of him, Will couldn't help but think this thing was tougher than the Grand Duke. So could it be the monster Devende? While flying above the city, Sarah wondered why a monster like Devende, the unique species of the 40th floor, had appeared here. It was a monster that had even slain former members of the Magia Vander. Mars said it had cost them 50 lives just to shove that thing into the gate, so they fully expected it to give them absolute hell. Now back to Will. He was sliding backward, overwhelmed by the sheer gap in power between him and the monster. He started to realize that even though he was avoiding direct hits, he still kept getting sent flying like a piece of paper. This wasn't an opponent he could face in a straight-up sword fight. The only thing he could do now was run. But then he saw the monster turning toward 2 students. As they stood there, wondering if this was the end for them, Will rushed in and blocked the monster's attack with his sword, telling them to run. Blocking the blow left him wide open. The monster seized the chance and slammed him with a powerful kick, sending him flying. It didn't stop there. It chased after Will and smashed him into the ground with another hit. Seeing the monster about to finish Will off, a dwarf rushed in just in time. He shoved it away and told Will to stay put. Then he called over his fellow dwarves, and together they moved in to gang up on the monster. Iris announced that all forces were to converge on the southern part of the city. They had to prioritize taking down Devende. Headless had been expecting them to try and force a surrender, so he gave the monster another order. Right after receiving it, a black core emerged from the monster's chest and began absorbing magical elements. As everyone stood there, unsure of what was happening, Edward shouted for them to pull back. It was a trap, and they had fallen right into it. Devende started absorbing magical elements from across the entire city. Headless explained to Mars that Devende's unique septal ability allowed it to absorb monsters' magical elements. In other words, it could devour its own kind to become insanely powerful. Sarah shouted that this was bad and ordered the dwarves to stop the absorption. The dwarves immediately moved in, surrounding the monster and trying to shut it down. But then, out of nowhere, a mysterious spell struck them, halting their efforts instantly. It was Mars, attacking with his black lightning magic. He then told them to stay right where they were and witness the birth of a true monster. Like roots bursting up through the surface, Mars's magic blocked every movement the dwarves tried to make. Meanwhile, Devende monster kept growing larger and larger, slowly transforming into something entirely new. In an instant, sharp spikes erupted from its body, shooting out in every direction and striking the dwarves around it. Seeing that, Mars looked thrilled like a complete psychopath, saying this was the best outcome. The mage's magic was useless against it, and the dwarves' brute strength wouldn't work either. Headless stated that this whole affair was a ritual. The city was its altar, and the final result would be the slaughter of the Magi Evander. Will finally realize that the massive number of monsters had all been sacrifices. Rigarden's desperate efforts to defend itself had only been used to strengthen their trump card. He thought that neither the mages nor the dwarves stood a chance against it. It was simply too strong. The only way to stop it was to use that power. The same power Will had used back in the dungeon. At that moment, Rosti sent a spell his way and told him to prepare his sword. But right then, the monster nullified the attack with the mage killer and reappeared near Rosti, slicing his hand. Will froze in shock at the sight, then immediately charged at the monster. However, with a single blow, he was sent flying onto the rooftop of a building. The monster kept chasing Will up onto the roof, and the fierce fight carried on there. Even though he was injured, Rosti was more worried about Will than his own condition. He told the cat that it needed to go find Colette, because he had something else to take care of, and he swore to protect its master. The fight on the rooftop raged on, but Will slowly realized that no matter how angry he got, he couldn't win. And no matter how calm he stayed, there was no tactic he could come up with that would work. Knowledge or wisdom, the sword skills he had built up, or his insignificant feelings in the face of such a cruel reality, none of it could stand against that thing. In the next moment, the monster slammed him into the wall once again. Will gave in to the cruel reality. Just as the monster was about to finish him with a sword strike, a sudden explosion went off, blasting Will off the rooftop. When he looked back at the spot where he had been standing, he saw Rosti smiling at him, telling him that he would always be there for him. Suddenly, a sword stabbed straight through Rosti's back. Their hands reached out for each other, but they'd never touch again. The moment slipped away, leaving only silence and heartbreak. Will fell from the height, but luckily Werkner, riding his flying monster, caught him midair. Will kept screaming hysterically, calling out Rosti's name. And as they flew away from Devende, he told Will to stop, that Rosti was already dead, and that he couldn't let his sacrifice go to waste. Inside the tower, Zio snapped. He slammed his fist into the table and stepped away from it. Another member of the Magi Evander asked where he thought he was going. Zio answered that he was heading into the battle. People out there were crying, screaming, dying helplessly and pathetically. Every single one of them was useless. But the most useless of all were the Magi Evander, who had abandoned those people to die. The other Magi Evander told him that Aaron Sama should have explained it already. If the Magi Evander were to fall, the barrier would disappear. And if that happened, the invaders from the heavens would return and reduce this world to ashes. Even they wouldn't stand much of a chance against that thing in their current condition. That was why, at the very least, he had to wait until their magic power recovered. He also needed to be aware of his position as a Magi Evander, and return to his seat. Zio replied that he could keep that gutless title of Magi Evander for himself. At that moment, Elfaria rose from her seat and walked straight up to Aaron, telling him to rescind his order. They were just wasting time here. But Aaron said he wouldn't change his mind and told her to back off. That was when Elfaria lost her temper. Ice power began to seep out from her body, freezing everything around her. She told him that she was going to save Will, and the people dear to her. And if he tried to stand in her way, she would take him down right now. Back to Will and Werkner, flying away from Devende. Werkner was thinking that the battle lines had already collapsed because of it. The remaining Dinobolos were starting to push the mages back. Not even the dwarves could do anything to stop the situation from getting worse. The only hope they had left was Will. At that moment Will started talking. He said that he couldn't do anything and that he couldn't save anyone. Because he couldn't use magic, he couldn't protect Elfaria, Rosti, or anyone else. It was because he was a failure and incompetent. He shouted that it was all his fault. Then he turned to Werkner and asked why he was the only one who couldn't use magic. Werkner told him to get a grip. This wasn't the time for that. But at that moment, they saw Mars blocking their path. While summoning countless magic circles across the sky, he said that this brat reeked far worse than the dwarves. He reeked of trouble, and that was exactly why he was going to kill both of them in one clean swoop. Then he fired off multiple spells at them all at once. At the same time, When Colette saw Kiki and the traces of blood on it, she started to worry about Will. Then she told her to follow the scent. When Cian saw this, he began to follow them and told Julius that he was leaving this place. On the roof, Headless thought that while Mars was having his fun, the monster should move on to the main dish. Then he cast a spell at the tower, which caught the monster's attention, and it started heading that way. Up in the sky, Sarah saw everything, the spell's target and the monster. She announced to everyone that it was heading for the tower, and they must not let it near the central floors at any cost, because that monster could kill the Magiavander. Devende noticed Sarah, and the monster instantly attacked with sharp spikes. Sarah tried to block it, but too late, the strike triggered a massive explosion. Edward saw it happen and could only scream her name. In panic, he ordered the dwarves to launch a suicide attack. They had to head for the city center and do whatever it took to destroy Devende's weapon. Gina asked if he was kidding. Her people were already battered from acting as shields for the mages, and now he was telling them to go and die. Edward said this was right, that he wanted them to die for the sake of the capital to protect the people. His insane words left Gina stunned, thinking the mages only saw dwarves as tools. Suddenly, Dinobolos sneaked behind Gina and tried to strike her. But Edward shoved her aside and took the hit himself. Then he cast a spell that killed the monster. When Gina asked why he saved her, Edward said that in this situation, against an enemy immune to magic, his life was worth less than the dwarves. The dwarves would be compensated for this, so they had to give him their lives. Gina regretted her foolish thoughts earlier. Then she told her men to gather and head for the city center. At another place, Colette ran ahead with Cian chasing behind. Cian shouted for her to stop. Then out of nowhere Devende crashed down in front of her, freezing them both in fear. On the roof of Rigarden Magic Academy, Headmaster Cauldron listened to her men's reports. One said Edward was injured and they couldn't reach Werkner. Another reported the western battle lines had collapsed. A third revealed the High Mage unit in the northeast had been wiped out. Cauldron start thinking that the situation is the worst. It's taking everything they have just to protect the people. They are unable to push the enemy back. Due to the dwarves joining the battle, the number of mage killer has been reduced, but they can't stop Devende. Meanwhile, Iris, the one handling the comms right now, thought every battlefield was in dire straits. They couldn't scrape together enough fighting strength with just the few dwarves left, and at this point the only option was to throw their lives away to hold the monsters back. If things kept going like this, the tower would fall. She started begging for someone to help them, and right then she got a message through her drones. The sender demanded a report on the situation and asked where he could find the sword. That guy was Finn. He was asking where Will Serfort was right now. At another place, Mars smirked, saying that Bastard wasn't bad at all. He hadn't expected him to fight back in that situation. But he'd gouged it out, and it was over now. On the street, we see Will lying on the ground. He slowly stood up, looking around, and asked out loud where he was. A voice answered that they'd crash-landed on the western edge of the city, and all he could do was protect him. When Will turned toward the voice, he saw Werkner, with a gaping hole in his chest. The sight shocked him. Werkner told him he was sorry, and that now he could only rely on him. Only Will could save the city. But Will said it was impossible. He had caused Rosty's death. He kept being saved by others, unable to protect the people important to him. He couldn't change anything. A sword couldn't turn the world upside down. He was just incompetent, unable to use magic. At that moment, Werkner hugged him tightly and said he'd been lying all along. Will could use magic. Magic that gave everyone hope. The one and only magic. And then, Werkner's voice disappeared. Will cried, shaking Werkner's body, begging him not to die, and to tell him what his magic was. At that moment Finn approached them. He said an insignificant Will, the silvery light that cuts through everything. Will turned to him, and Finn told him it was fine. If Werkner's heartbeat had revived, then he would come back to life. Then Finn asked Will what he was doing. He should get up. The stage was already set. Will asked about the meaning of the silvery light and what Finn meant by an insignificant will. Finn explained that what he was talking about was where the will lies, or maybe he should call it feelings, or something like an auto-suggestion. He told Will to raise his voice and shout to encourage himself, a mighty roar that could turn lies into truth. Will said such a childish ruse couldn't save anyone. But Finn pressed him. He must not say such ridiculous things. Those who cannot transform themselves have no chance of turning the world on its head. That was the way a sword striving to be a wand in this world. He must recall his origin and get back to his starting point. The key was already unlocked. Now he had to take up the sword and embark on a journey, to cross the dark hills and go beyond the false sky. And at the same time, Finn dropped his blood onto the sword and cast a lightning spell upon it. Then Finn told Will that he already knew the answer, the name of the magic that resided in his heart. He had to let out its birth cry. For a brief moment, memories of all his struggles flashed through Will's mind. Will stood up while gripping his sword, and declared the name of his magic is courage. In that instant, an overwhelming surge of magic began swirling around Will and poured straight into his body. Finn then said, "Limit off, now draw it out." In a flash, Will took off, running at lightning speed across the city, cutting down every Dinobolos he found in his path. The two mages who had just been saved were left confused, not understanding what had just happened. And it didn't stop there. Will kept moving in every direction. Even the massive swarm of Dinobolos surrounding Edward was completely wiped out by him. Edward and the others were left stunned, watching the monsters in front of them get erased in an instant. Will's movements were so fast they couldn't even be seen. Even the dwarves didn't realize it was him. When Iris saw that light, she was shocked, watching it slaughter the monsters one after another. Meanwhile, Cian was still fighting to protect Colette against Devende. Colette shouted at him to run, but Cian didn't move from where he stood. Pointing his wand forward, he said he wouldn't run, because Will wouldn't run in this situation either. He refused to lose to Will, who was braver than anyone. Just as Devende was about to cut him down, Will appeared beside Cian in a flash, blocking and knocking the slash away. Then Will said it wasn't true. He was just a pathetic guy, someone who envied, who was jealous, who admired and longed to become a wand all this time. That's why, from now on, he would be like a singular magic sword. Cian and Colette were stunned by Will's sudden appearance, his hair now white, his body surrounded by lightning magic. In a flash, Will rushed toward Devende and delivered a powerful slash with his sword. The impact sent the monster flying far away, straight toward the central floors of the Magic Academy. Realizing the monster was heading their way, one of Headmaster Cauldron's subordinates urged her to evacuate immediately. But Cauldron stood silent, then cast a spell, Caridos Acrum, to stop the flying Devende and shield the walls of the central floors. Her subordinates kept insisting she should evacuate, but Cauldron told them to wait. She wanted to see who it was that could stand against Devende. As the smoke cleared, Will walked forward, his aura blazing like aura farming. The overwhelming energy wrapped around him, lightning crackling, making even Devende hesitate. Staring at his opponent, Will said it was time to end this. In an instant, the two of them charged straight at each other, creating a massive explosion. People from all across the city felt the shockwave and realized it had come from the central floors. Wignall and the others understood it was Will fighting Devende, and they immediately rushed toward the source. Edward, feeling the shockwave, grew frustrated, realizing it was Will behind all of this. High in the tower, all those so-called Magiavander, who hadn't done a damn thing until now, watched the battle through a magic orb. They were frozen, unable to believe the collision of such forces. Even Elfaria was stunned, seeing the overwhelming strength Will had unleashed. The academy students who witnessed that unbelievable fight wanted to help, but they quickly realized they were completely powerless. They couldn't provide backup. Magic didn't work against this enemy, and stepping in might only get in Will's way. One by one they fell silent, shame written across their faces. They used to mock him, bully him, laugh at him even, yet now it was Will standing tall and protecting them. The students froze in silence, until Cian's voice suddenly tore through the stillness, shouting and cheering for Will as he faced the monster. One by one the others joined in, their voices rising higher and higher until the quiet finally shattered into a thunderous chorus, a wave of courage crashing straight toward him. Iris stood there stunned. Rigarden, the city of magic, the very heart of the magic world, was now cheering for someone branded incompetent, a boy who couldn't even use magic. Something like this should have been impossible. As Will traded blows with Devende, those cheers reached him. He thought about everything he had endured. The misery, the suffering, the endless ridicule thrown his way. He had been shunned, laughed at, pushed aside. There were even times when he hated the world itself. And yet somewhere deep in his heart, he had always carried one quiet wish, to be acknowledged. So even if these voices only existed for this one brief moment, he wanted to protect them. Will surged forward and unleashed a devastating slash, but Devende blocked it with his mage killer. And in the next instant Will's sword shattered clean into two pieces. Everyone watching felt their stomach drop. Without his weapon, the balance of the fight would shift. Devende burst out laughing and swung with brutal force, but Will reacted instantly, slipping away and leaping back to create distance between them. High in the tower, Elfaria, who had been watching with growing worry, suddenly moved toward the balcony. One of the Magia Vander, Cariot, immediately told her to stop, reminding her that the Magia Vander were not allowed to leave the room. Elfaria answered with a calm, flat expression that she wasn't leaving. She only wanted to watch from the window. Once she reached the balcony, she casually said she had slipped while casting a spell. In that moment, a sword of ice formed in the air and shot downward, flying straight toward Will on the central floors. Will noticed the sword coming straight at him, and a small smile appeared on his face. He knew exactly who it came from, the one he admired most. He raised the broken remains of his sword and activated his loading mode. A massive explosion erupted during the process. A freezing wind and thick clouds of smoke swept across the battlefield. When the smoke finally began to clear, Will stood there transformed. His body now merged with the sword Elfaria had given him. He now held a massive blade of ice. Loading complete. Magic sword mode. Ice Princess. Cian immediately thought back to the moment Will had used that power when they fought the Grand Duke. But Julius shook his head and pointed out that magic didn't work against this monster. So no matter how strong that power looked, it shouldn't matter. Devende saw the transformation and only grew more excited. The monster rushed forward, eager to clash again. But Will remained still. He slowly closed his eyes, sensing that this new power inside him couldn't be stopped. And somehow it felt like Elfaria herself was standing beside him in this fight. Then he swung once. A single slash. Devende's right arm instantly froze solid, and in the next moment the frozen limb shattered into countless fragments. Everyone watching was stunned. The attack had clearly worked, ignoring the very laws of the mage killer. Mars clenched his teeth in frustration, unable to understand how Will's magic could affect something that was supposed to nullify it. Even the members of the Magia Vander were shocked. They realized this wasn't ordinary magic power at all. The fifth element, the power described in ancient legends as the key to Genesis, the force said to have started the world itself. Aaron watched the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. To him, it meant one thing. Finn had finally succeeded in the promise he once swore to the Magic Queen: to bring wand and sword together. Back to the final battle, Will planted his foot against the wall, watching carefully for an opening to strike Devende, but the monster answered first, spewing black magic straight at him. Will reacted instantly and leaped aside, landing smoothly before shifting his position to attack from below, and with one clean slash the monster froze in place, badly wounded. But the creature refused to give up, unleashing a barrage of black magic that rained down on Will from every direction at once. Yet Will remained calm, and with a single swing of his blade he shattered every spell flying toward him. Everyone watching stood stunned. The fight looked almost unreal, like watching Elfaria wield her wand, and it felt as if Will and Elfaria were fighting side by side. Mars suddenly shouted toward Headless, and in the next instant Headless began casting spells into the sky. Dozens of magic circles opening overhead to form massive gates where waves of Diabolos monsters poured out in huge numbers, until within moments Will found himself surrounded by dozens of them, completely encircled. Yet he didn't hesitate, driving his sword into the ground as he activated a spell, Overload Full Burst, El Gra Frost 7th Art, and in the next instant dozens of massive ice spears erupted from the earth, piercing through the monsters and slaughtering them in a single explosive wave of destruction. The sheer force of the magic left everyone speechless. No one could fully comprehend what they were witnessing. Magic energy swirled wildly around Will, and surrounded by that raging storm of power, he murmured that it was time to end this battle. He lowered his stance as magic gathered and spiraled around his body, his blade stretching outward as if ready to cut the world itself. In a flash, Will charged forward, leaped high into the air, and brought down a devastating slash. The monster's entire body froze solid in an instant, before shattering into countless fragments. Rigarden Magic Academy erupted with cheers, a thunderous wave of celebration rolling across the city as everyone shouted the name of the hero who had saved them, while tears flowed freely among the crowd, joy mixing with grief for the city that had been destroyed and the lives that had been lost. High above on a rooftop, Finn watched the scene with a satisfied laugh, calling it wonderful, far beyond his expectations. their last remaining hope. He let out a quiet sigh and said he had kept her waiting long enough, Mercedes, and that it was finally time for the contract to be fulfilled, 500 years being nothing more than a small margin of error. He then looked toward the sky and said the long prologue had finally come to an end. The false sky would be next, because the curtain was rising, and the story of Wistoria, where wand and sword finally come together, was only just beginning. The day after the Terminaria festival incident, the damage across the city was clear. Buildings and houses lay in ruins, broken walls and shattered streets scattered everywhere, yet the people of Rigarden did not fall into despair. Mages and dwarves worked side by side, rebuilding what had been destroyed, their cooperation turning the devastated streets into a place filled with movement and determination. From a rooftop, Finn watched the scene quietly, observing the harmony below, and a faint smile appeared on his face as he remarked that it was exactly what he expected from Rigarden. With the dwarves helping the mages, the repairs were progressing at an incredible pace, and at this rate the city would likely return to its former state sooner than anyone expected. Finn eventually turned away from the rooftop and stepped back into the building, but just as he began walking away, Iris called out to him using his old name, Invis, causing Finn to stop and glance back with a cold look in his eyes. He admitted that he was glad to see Iris had survived the chaos, yet he made it clear that he disliked being called by that name. Iris responded without hesitation, saying that the name suited him perfectly, precisely because she despised it. Finn only gave a faint smile, realizing that Iris had not changed at all, and he calmly asked why she would bother calling out to someone she hated so much. Iris then pleaded with him to stay away from Will, warning that if Finn interfered things would start moving far too quickly, and once that happened no one would be able to stop Will anymore. Finn seemed genuinely surprised to hear those words coming from Iris, and with a teasing tone he asked if she had fallen for Will. Iris flinched at the suggestion, but before the conversation could go any further Finn coldly ended it, stating that Will was someone he intended to take with him. Without another word Finn walked away, his steps calm and steady, and in his mind he quietly murmured that today was the graduation ceremony. Cauldron's little game had finally come to an end, and since Will had failed to advance the tower, it meant Finn was now free to take him away. Meanwhile in Will's room, he slowly woke up and went to wash his face. Standing in front of the mirror, he noticed that his hair color had returned to normal, and he wondered what exactly had happened to him during that fight. Then his eyes moved toward the empty desk, and he remembered Rosti who had died. The laughter of the friend who had always supported him and watched over him now existed only as memories. For a moment Will quietly remembered his friend while looking at the glasses that Rosti had repaired. He murmured that if Rosti were still here, he wondered what he would have told him about all of this. Even though he was still surrounded by grief, Will's maturity made him realize that sadness would never bring his friend back, and with that thought he continued forward, heading to the graduation ceremony. Inside a huge hall, all the students of the academy had gathered to attend the graduation ceremony. Headmaster Cauldron stood on the stage and began to speak, saying that according to the doctrine of magic, the great magic queen once said to laugh and celebrate whether the buds bloom or not, because when people look up toward them, the flowers surely dwell in the heavens. She then spoke about the tragedy of the Terminaria incident, where many lives had been lost, professors of the academy and more than a few students among them. To all those who sacrificed their lives protecting the people, including the high mages of the tower, she offered her condolences and paid her respects. At the same time, she reminded everyone that they must stop hanging their heads, because the tower itself had been endangered, and that tragedy might not be the end but a wake-up call that signals the coming of disaster. They carried the responsibility of sending the hopes they had nurtured into the future, and with those words she declared that the graduation ceremony of Rigarden Magic Academy would now begin. After that, Professor Edward stepped forward and said that the students of the 41st cohort should stand and line up in front of the stage. The graduates whose names were called would receive their diplomas, and then he sent the diplomas flying through the air with magic toward the students standing in line, including one that flew toward Will Serfort. Then Cauldron continued and said that the 250 students present had completed all courses of study at Rigarden Magic Academy and were recognized as having graduated. Finally, she said she was pleased to announce who would advance to the tower. Those whose names were called needed to come up on stage, where they would be awarded the Mercedes hat that symbolized their right to ascend the tower. She then began calling the names of the students who had earned more than 7,200 credit points and were advancing to the tower. And after finishing the list, she stated that these 49 students had earned the required credits and would be accepted into the tower. Everyone gave applause to the 49 students standing on the stage, while Will remained silent as he watched them. In a quiet murmur, he apologized to Elfaria, saying he couldn't keep his promise. But in the middle of that quiet despair, Cauldron suddenly spoke again, saying that however there was one more person who had met the acceptance criteria at the last minute. She explained that there were 2 requirements for advancing to the tower. The first was earning 7,200 credits, and the second was the invention of a new spell. That spell, she said, had swept away the despair of many, protected countless lives, and saved the city. It was a glorious achievement and a great feat worthy of honor. The name of that spell was Courage. And then she called for Will Serfort and told him to come before her. Professor Edward immediately opposed the decision, but Cauldron firmly ordered him to be silent. She then said that she was sure there were some who would object. Even so, anyone who recognized Will's courage as magic should give him a big round of applause. At first the hall remained silent, many people unwilling to acknowledge it. Even Edward and Werkner seemed doubtful, while Will simply accepted the situation quietly. Then suddenly the sound of someone clapping echoed through the hall. The first person to acknowledge him was Cian. Then Colette followed, and after her Lahanna and Wignall joined in, and slowly but surely more people began clapping until the entire hall was filled with applause. In the middle of that celebration, Werkner said to Edward that it was time to let Will go. Edward answered bitterly that as if he could. How could he show the boy a naive dream and then push him into the depths of despair? How could he make him suffer the same fate as him? Teacher Werkner calmly replied that Will would surely overcome it. After all, he had been pushed through countless trials by a very scary and kind professor. Meanwhile, on the balcony, Finn watched everything and quietly said to himself that Cauldron was certainly greedy. Perhaps it was time to spur the sword to seek a new horizon. To close the graduation ceremony, Headmaster Cauldron declared that for these 50 students, it was the consensus of everyone present in the hall that they would be accepted into the tower. She reminded them that they were a generation that had gone through the harshest times, and although many trials and tribulations surely awaited them in the future, she prayed that they would reach the heavens and vanquish evil. High above on the rooftop near the Great Bell, the spirit of Rosti could be seen smiling gently as he offered his congratulations. The year 506 of the magic calendar, the year that would later be remembered as the year of hope and demise, had finally begun. Inside a dream, Will and Elfaria are seen as children in the forest. Elfaria tells him that sunset lies at the end of a long journey, filled with perils, so they must prepare by learning many spells. While she speaks, Will thinks her eyes shine like jewels, dazzling and making him feel weak. He tries to say he is unsure, then Will wakes, realizing 5 years have passed, yet now he is on his way to her. Inside a clothing store, a man spoke of wisdom, sensitivity, and learning, the 3 teachings of Rig Arden Magic Academy. Only those who embody them may wear the proof of High Mage. Before him stood Cian, Ignar, Colette, Lahanna, and Julius dressed in the outfit known as Colorless Gloria. He praised their appearance and felt honored to have crafted garments for those spreading their wings toward the future. His name was Blant LaRue, 10th generation owner of the high-end store Lesserou. Cian said the size was perfect, a tradition upheld since Blant's predecessors. Colette admired the clothes, saying they were lightweight, easy to move in, and resistant to magic. Lahanna compared them to the Academy's cloaks and declared these superior. Ignar added that mages excel at such craft, the finest attire for ascending the tower. Julius stood silent. Colette asked what was wrong, but he lashed out, telling her to leave him alone. She moved to Lahanna, muttering, until Lahanna asked if the tower scouts had reached her. Colette admitted she had received a letter from the Earth faction. Lahanna revealed the Lightning faction sought her, Ignar the Fae, Cian the Flame, yet none came for Julius. After this, Ignar asked about Will. Colette answered that Will had finished preparations ahead of them, and at that very moment, he was surely at Donan's place. At Donan's blacksmith, he handed Will a new sword. Will was surprised and happy as he inspected the purple blade. Donan explained he had reforged the broken sword and set a Wist jewel within it. Now it could cut magic as before, and the jewel's stored power could be amplified. Its name was Wist Twin Silver, and Will's joy was clear. Donan added that the previous sword had been one of his finest works too, yet Will broke it with brute strength that could shame dwarves. Will apologized and thanked him, then asked the price. Donan refused his money, saying it was thanks for saving them all. He wished Will good luck, told him to go wild in the tower, and called him the Sword Mage. Once all the students were ready, they set off for the tower. Near the door stood Sarah, looking down. She noted that all 50 had arrived and that their brand new Gloria shone brightly. They were short-handed, so she alone would attend, yet she assured them she would get the job done. Seeing their eagerness, she cast a spell and the door opened. She welcomed them to the paradise of research and the hell of diligent study, calling them fledglings. As Will climbed the stairs, he thought he would not have made it this far without Rosti, and now he was coming for Elfie. Inside, some wondered why it was dark and empty. Sarah shouted, "Access the gate, unlock," and the platforms began to rise as the ceiling opened. On the new floor, students gasped at the sight of a colorless sky, a vast horizon, and floating castles. Sarah explained that this was the tower's first floor, the section called Colorless Garden. Outside the tower, the term Upper College referred mainly to the facilities here. It was a base of livelihood and production supporting the tower from bottom to top, and also the highest academic institution for research and development of new spells. A glorious realm for mages, accessible only to those acknowledged by the Academy. Whether they lived here permanently depended entirely on them. She told the students to proceed, as they were the main guests of the day and everyone awaited them in the central ceremony hall. Lehanna remarked to Ignor about the strange sky and light. He agreed, saying it was surely the elves' phantasmagoric magic, an application of the Magnatra's Ringle to create a vision of paradise inside the tower. Colette pulled Will aside, pointing out the many people wearing Gloria like them. She asked if that was a garden of magic plants, and over their experimental grounds for magical creatures. She said this truly was the forefront of magic research, and after all this time the fact she had become a high mage was finally sinking in. It felt like a dream. Cian noticed Will smiling and reminded him not to get carried away. The tower was not the bright and cheery place he imagined. Will began to wonder, realizing the gazes of the high mages watching them were strange. Julius, silent at the side, thought to himself that the rumors were true, and at this rate they would share the same fate. The students reached a great building and Sarah told them they had arrived. Inside the ceremony hall, they found the high mages waiting along with the head of the upper college, Kreutz Harlan. Colette wondered if those were the mages of Earth, Wind, and Darkness factions and felt uneasy at their stares. 4 platforms rose, each bearing a throne for the great factions of Magiavander. Alvis Vina, the Ice Princess Wand, Torzus Fadge, the Lightning Lord's Wand, Erleaf Kanan, the Fey Saint's Wand, and Instia Valham, the Flame Emperor's Wand. Will saw Elfaria and smiled, saying he had kept her waiting, but she ignored his gaze and he did not know why. Above, Sarah thanked the Magiavander for coming from the top of the tower, then turned to the newcomers. In accordance with their wishes, she announced the start of the Blooming Festival. The chosen fledglings, head-hunted during their years at the Academy, would be bestowed the blessing of color. Spells appeared beneath certain students, and in an instant their glorias changed into faction colors with emblems on their brooches. Cian was chosen by the Flame faction, Colette by Earth, Lehanna by Lightning, and Ignor by Fey. Will and Julius stood stunned, realizing they had no color, for none of the factions had chosen them. Sarah told them that the blessings of color were glorious honors, and now they must go to their factions. She prayed that many would reach the distant heights of the tower. The students moved to their factions, but some noticed that no blessings had been given to certain others, including Will and Julius, who remained with colorless Gloria. Sarah explained that those without blessings were colorless, in other words worthless. Only mages in a faction could climb the tower. All others could not proceed beyond this point. Lehanna whispered that the information known only to high nobility was true. Cian added that those without factions became permanent residents of the first floor, mere logs to support the talented. Julius told Will that the tower's nickname came from the shadow of its glory, the Graveyard of Wands, and Will was shaken. Sarah then said that since they had reached the tower, they would be given a chance. If they showed their abilities here, a faction might accept them. This was the true main event of the Blooming Festival. A spell activated and monsters appeared. The first Blooming Festival began. The task was simple: defeat the monsters however they liked, whether with skill and finesse or wild blasts, and appeal to the factions. Sarah urged them to flourish and bloom, reminding them that the only rule in the tower was to show their worth. One student tried, but his spell had no effect. He was shocked that his magic did not work. At the side, Kreutz explained that the guardians produced by the tower were called Zoctonia. Each had a credit value of 30 points, comparable to monsters from the latter half of the middle floors. For student mages they were impossible to defeat, as the two shields they carried repelled any half-baked spells. In the arena, Julius attacked a monster with ice spells, quickly destroying it. Another appeared behind him and struck with a cleaving blow that tore him apart, but only his clones shattered. He had cast white art, creating illusions and switching places. In an instant he repositioned behind the monster and unleashed Azure Ice Poet, blasting it into shards until nothing remained. Sarisa remarked to Elfaria that Julius had made short work of 2 Zoctonia. His skill greatly improved since the Grand Festival. She was amazed at his control of clone magic, but Elfaria felt disgusted and uninterested. At the Wind faction, one said he was far above the rest and would be an immediate asset. At the Darkness faction, someone wondered why he had not been headhunted. At the Earth faction, one admitted that if he were not an ice user, they would have taken him. Hearing this, Julius thought it was true. He was a genius, able to use clone magic, handsome and noble. It was absurd to compare him to rabble. He believed Elfaria should look at him, but she turned away in disgust. Julius wondered if it was because of the Grand Festival, because of his rude words and harassment of Will. Sarisa looked down at the arena and commented that aside from Julius, no other mage showed promise. For better or worse, only one person was garnering attention. In the arena, Will was evading the monster. Julius called out, asking what he was doing running away the entire time. At that moment, Will stopped and told Kiki to stay out of it. Adjusting his glasses, he thought to himself that this must be the reason for Elfaria's sad look. She was sorry she couldn't headhunt him. But it was fine. He would come to her with his own 2 feet. He dashed toward a monster, evaded its strike, and countered with a single slash to the head, killing it instantly. Everyone watching was shocked. Each adjutant from the factions was stunned by his ability to read all the enemy's movements in such a short time. Even more incredible was that he had cut straight through Zoctonia's shield, cleaving it in 2. Will kept fighting wildly, dodging his opponent's strikes. He realized he had seen those moves before and now could read them more clearly. His Gloria was light and flexible, giving him freedom of motion, while Donan's sword could cut through anything. He felt unstoppable. More monsters appeared. Julius cast Glass Edia, Azure Ice Poet, launching a barrage of ice projectiles. But one stray shot flew toward Elfaria. Seeing this, Will shouted to Julius that he was borrowing it, then dashed in front of Elfaria, blocking the spell. The impact exploded into a massive cloud of mist that covered the arena. As the fog faded, Will stood tall, holding an ice sword. Loading complete. Glass Weiss, he declared, the Azure Ice Magic Sword. In a flash, he charged the monsters. Every monster froze solid and shattered into pieces. The crowd was stunned. Some whispered it was a blizzard spell. Others wondered if it was the legendary Whis that once appeared in Terminaria. At the side, Sarah could only wonder what she was supposed to do now, as all the Guardians had already been defeated. Suddenly, a magic spell appeared beneath Will, revealing that he had received blessings from flame, ice, earth, wind, and darkness. The sight was astonishing. 5 blessings bestowed upon someone who could not even use magic. The moment carried an air of impossibility, something unheard of in the annals of the factions. Meanwhile, Kreutz looked displeased with the situation. He muttered that Will was not even a multi-attribute user, yet he had received blessings from a total of 5 factions. Sarah then addressed Will. She explained that when a person is bestowed multiple blessings, he or she gains the right to choose, and asked him which faction he wished to join. The situation left Will stunned, unable to believe what was happening. Just as Will was about to make his choice, a single voice broke through, unexpectedly interrupting the sacred blessing. The one who disrupted the blessing was Kreutz Harlan, head of the upper college. He said that what Will did could not be called magic. He understood allowing him into the tower as recognition for his feats during the attack on Terminaria, but he doubted Will had what it took to join any of their factions. Elfaria shouted back, asking if he had not seen what Will accomplished, insisting that it was magic. Kreutz answered that he had seen everything, but claimed Will had not accomplished anything, only guided another spell to where he wanted it. To him, it was clear that Will was not a mage but a barbaric warrior. He added that the world would reproach the tower if it admitted what amounted to a dwarf into its ranks, the thought alone making him shudder. Eleanor told Kreutz to stop the theater and speak plainly. Kreutz replied simply, if even a trace of magic aptitude existed in Will, he must prove it. He then cast a spell into the arena, summoning 2 magic beasts. He explained that what they saw was a Walthus, a creature recently developed in the tower to suppress dwarven uprisings. He told them to behold, then cast a spell at one of the beasts, killing it instantly. He said that all it took to kill the gelatinous beast was magic. Even the weakest spell would suffice, as he had just demonstrated. In other words, one could not hope to defeat it without magic. Suddenly, the beast attacked Will from behind, but he quickly dodged and slashed it in two with his sword. The beast regenerated instantly, as if it had never been wounded. Seeing this, Will wondered if it was indestructible, perhaps like the Balker, a monster that nullifies physical attacks. On the sidelines, the Flame Emperor remarked that there was some logic to Kreutz's words. He supposed that observing one skirmish would be due diligence, and as a Magiavander, he had to make it clear that the tower was the apex of magic. For a sword bereft of it, there was no room for advancement. Back in the arena, Will was running as the magic creature chased him. He realized that no matter what he did, it kept coming back, but every magical creature had a core, and if he could sever it, he might have a chance. He stabbed the monster, but Kreutz shouted that he was a fool, saying if its body was gelatinous, then its core would be the same, and Will underestimated the genius of the tower. The creature released lightning strikes when impaled by Will's sword, but Will pulled back in time and created distance. From above, Sarah said that building stun shock into a creature meant to suppress dwarves was typical of Kreutz, who always created the most horrid things. On the sidelines, two students tried to help Will by casting spells he could use, but they were suddenly struck by an attack. Kreutz stepped in, ordering them to hold their wands, declaring that this was no assessment. He was putting this pretender on trial. This was an inquisition. Meanwhile, at the Flame faction, Cian stepped forward and shouted to Will that he could do this. Will kept evading the attacks of the magic beast, but then the creature struck him with flying bolts that sent him crashing into the wall. Not surrendering, Will started to get up, saying he could still do this. He was not giving up yet. At that moment, Kreutz cast a spell, killing the beast, and declared that any more effort on Will's part would be a waste of time. He said Will was clearly unfit, and proposed that he remain colorless under the supervision of the Upper Institute. The power he had used to defeat Devende was extraordinary, that could not be denied, but they would study him in the Institute, unveil his secrets, and use that power for the good of the magical world. The Flame Emperor added that he would have Will be his lab rat, and as long as the mysteries of the fifth source could be unraveled and applied, it did not matter to him where Will was kept. Suddenly, Elfaria grew enraged. Ice began to ooze from her, and she struggled to contain herself. The Flame Emperor told her this was not the time for a tantrum, but she said to Kreutz that this was not what had been discussed, warning that she was close to losing her temper. At that moment, Zio, the Lightning Lord's wand, cut in, saying that if they were done blabbering, another bloom was coming up, so the nerds should save their lectures until then. Sarah explained that normally the next bloom would take place half a year later, but the factions were in desperate need of new members after suffering deep losses at Terminaria. As such, this year's second bloom would take place earlier, 1 week from today. She said that the generation of disquiet was looked upon with great promise, and the tower, perhaps even the entire world, expected much from them. Nothing less than their blood, sweat, and tears would earn them acceptance. Those who did not receive honors today should steel themselves for the next bloom, and this included Will Serfort. She added that the Magiavander and the Institute were on the same page about this arrangement, since the only rule of the tower was to show one's worth. Kreutz gritted his teeth, while the Flame Emperor said that indeed, the Magiavander were all too familiar with the need to constantly prove their worth, and their station was proof of that. Eleanor then said that with that, the charade was over. Each wand used a spell to make their platform float as they departed. Kreutz muttered that this was absurd, a waste of time and energy. In the arena, the students stood frozen. The light of blessings had passed them by, leaving their fate colorless. Will lay on the ground, and Julius asked if he was crying. Covering his eyes with his arm, Will replied no, saying he only felt weird. No matter the circumstance, no matter the hole he was in, whenever he thought he had found a way out, something always pushed him back down. Then he raised both hands and made up his mind. The world could push him down as many times as it wanted, but he would conquer every challenge thrown his way. Meanwhile, Zio walked through the hall. His adjutant Guilford remarked that the outcome was unexpected. Zio wondered what he meant, and Guilford explained he had assumed Zio would give Will Serfort honors, since Will seemed like the type he would favor. Zio grinned and told him that after all this time he still did not understand him. He made it clear that nothing built more character and strength than rising from the depths of despair. At the tower in the first stratum interim room, several students saw Will studying hard. He thought that his inability to use magic made him elementless, but just because he could not cast spells did not mean he could not handle magic. Whis was proof of that. If he analyzed this phenomenon and found its use in the world of magic, maybe one of the factions would give him recognition. Soon 2 students came up to him. They said they were going to train in the dungeon and asked if he wanted to party up with them. Just as he was about to answer, Julius burst through the door and suddenly declared he would do this washouts training with him. Will asked since when. Julius told him he didn't have time to be palling around with strangers in the dungeon. What Will should be doing was learning how to control Whis, and Julius was the one who could help him. Will said that was nice of him, but asked why he would want to help. Julius replied that they had been through a lot, and just like Wignall and the others, he saw Will not only as a party member but also as a friend. The word friend moved Will until his eyes lit up. He thanked Julius and gladly accepted his help. But Julius thought Will was hook. This talentless fool must be out of his mind if he believed anyone would help him for no reason. Julius saw him as the perfect tool to secure his own future in the tower. By helping Will, Elfaria would clear Julius's reputation and recognize his talents. It was a foolproof plan. He would squeeze this dwarf-like buffoon for all he was worth. Acceptance into the Ice faction was as good as his. Then Julius pointed at Will and told him no more dilly-dallying. It was time to get to work. Will grew excited and followed him. The scene shifted to the eastern reach plane of Solitude. Will was training with a sword in his hand. He told Julius that he had primed the blade as instructed and asked what came next. Julius told him to keep the magic bound to the sword. Then Julius chanted a spell that summoned guardians shaped like ice birds and ordered them to attack Will. He explained that these were lower-level guardians, but with enough magic in the summoning they could withstand damage from weak sources of the same element. Julius wanted Will to fight the guardian without destroying it while keeping the magic in his blade. This way, Will would learn to activate Whis on his own. Will said that it made sense but wondered how he could activate Whis by himself. He thought about how he could not use spells and had only primed his blade by relying on outside magic. Activating Whis with his own power sounded impossible, like creating a new spell from scratch. His thoughts were cut off by Julius, who told him to stop talking and just do it. Julius said that theorizing would not help. What mattered was anchoring the magic to the blade. Will had to figure out how to do that, and no matter where the magic came from, it would be his own once he sustained it. Julius told him to lower Whis to a fraction of its full strength, even 1,000th, and focus on keeping the flow constant. He had to maintain it through the day and even while asleep. The goal was to become so steady that he could raise the power at will in battle. Hearing this, Will grew excited. Felt like real magic. Julius added that Will would likely face the oozes again in the upcoming bloom. One fighter had already shown that even weak magic could defeat them. Having even a small amount of magic ready would be a huge advantage. With only a week to prepare, Will needed to work backward from his goal and focus on what mattered. Inefficient effort would not help this time. Will admired Julius and realized that he wanted him to learn how to anchor and sustain magic in his sword while sparing the Guardian. Julius was using the Guardian to train him in control. It was a clever method, and Will thought Julius was not among the top 3 in their class for nothing. He thanked Julius and called him brilliant, then wondered why no faction had chosen him. Julius shouted that it was all his fault. In Elfaria's room, Iris asked her why she had not given Julius a blessing. As a watcher, she said she couldn't just stand around with her hands in her pockets when a mage of his talent made himself known. Elfaria answered that Julius had provoked her with his comment about stripping her, his constant bullying of Will, and not to mention exposing her embarrassing past to the entire academy. Hearing this, Iris said the vendetta Elfaria had against him was clearly personal. Elfaria, in a weak voice, asked what Master Aaron thought about Will. Iris replied that Aaron Sama didn't seem as welcoming as Cauldron when it came to a sword entering the world of wands, but she ventured that the great mage Aaron would be open to accepting someone with the determination and power to find his own way. Hearing this, Sarisa started thinking that Wilsair Fort and the emergence of Whis had split the tower. She had read countless documents and found nothing worthwhile that explained exactly what Whis was. Then she said to the others that a boy with a power capable of turning the world upside down was indeed irregular. With that blade of his, she admitted she had no idea how Elfaria should handle him. Iris then said that if the tower couldn't figure out what to do with him, she supposed she could put him under her protection. She was a watcher after all. Elfaria shot back, "In your dreams," and called her a charming little wench. The arguing made the atmosphere tense, and Sarisa thought to herself that this boy, Will Serfort, was going to tear down the tower. The scene returns to Will as he continues training against Julius's guardian, while Julius suddenly scolds him for making no progress, leaving Will confused by the outburst. Julius grumbled that another guardian had broken, that Will hadn't improved one bit, and wondered if he was wasting his magic on purpose. Hearing this, Will thought that no matter how hard he tried, he could only keep the magic flowing for at best 50 minutes before it dissipated. Whis drained a ton of energy from him whenever it deactivated. The only thing this training had taught him was Wiss's weaknesses. If he didn't make progress soon, all of this would be a waste of time. He then told Julius it might be better to learn more about Wiss first. He still didn't understand the power and considered asking a high mage or searching the tower's library. Julius shouted, demanding what Will thought he was doing at that very moment. He added that his clones were hard at work searching through books in the Institute's library, and hunting down that Finn boy for any scrap of information about Wiss. Hearing this, Will asked if Julius was controlling his Rs Weiss clones from afar, and why he was putting in so much effort. Julius shouted that they needed to train and gather information at the same time because they only had a week to make it work. Suddenly, Julius's head throbbed. Trying to process what his clones were seeing was overwhelming. He muttered that he hated multitasking. Seeing this, Will asked why Julius was working so hard for him. Julius shouted back for Will to open his eyes. He was helping him so he could help himself. His destiny as a Rheinberg was to make it to the top, to be a mage better than all the rest. He was using Will to get there, and he had promised to help him. Nobles don't go back on their promises. Hearing this, Will remembered when Julius had kept his promise to apologize to Donnan and the others after losing the Grand Magic Festival. Smiling, Will told Julius that he was truly kind, adding that kindness comes in many forms and differs from person to person. Colette showed her kindness by always helping him. Professor Werkner showed his by scolding him, and Cian had his own way of being kind. With a wide smile, Will said Julius's kindness might be driven by noblesse oblige, but that didn't make it any less real. He was a kind person, and Will thought that was wonderful. For a moment, the kind words caught Julius off guard. Then he turned and walked away, muttering that Will was starting to gross him out and that he'd had enough. He said he was taking a break. Will said he would stay behind to practice a little more and thanked Julius for his help. As he walked away, Julius thought he didn't give a damn about being kind. For a moment, he remembered his childhood, when his maid Anna had told him that he was such a kind little boy and that they all loved him most when he was kind. But it had all been a lie. He had been as kind as he could ever be, yet she would never be his. From that moment, he discovered that being selfish was far more rewarding. Showing off his talents, using others for his own ends, and belittling the weak and downtrodden had brought him more happiness than kindness ever did. In the present, Julius gritted his teeth as he kept walking, wondering how anyone dared to speak to him about kindness the way Anna had. He no longer needed kindness. That Julius had died long ago, and he was the one who had killed him. In the laboratory, Kreutz said that Will and Julius were struggling in vain. While observing the screen that monitored Julius, he called his assistant Charles and told him that he wanted a message sent to the colorless. Back to Julius, who was wandering aimlessly, lost and wondering if this place was a dungeon. Suddenly, a blast of magic struck from the side, hurling him across the ground. When he looked up, 3 mages were standing in front of him. Julius recognized them as mages from the Institute. One of them said they had received a message from the top to deal with a pair of insolent mages who were treating the courtyard like a playground and to put a stop to their training. Julius shouted back, mocking them for trying to sabotage him and make sure he failed the next bloom while still daring to call themselves mages of the tower. In response, all 3 attacked him at once, their combined assault sending Julius crashing into the wall before he dropped to the ground badly wounded. One of them said he could never understand their plight. They had climbed the tower without a faction and were ridiculed as colorless at every turn. Another said he would not spend the rest of his life as a mere log in the tower. The last one said that the factions needed new mages after Terminaria, and Kreutz had promised to recommend them if they took him out, they would finally have a chance to belong. Barely holding on, Julius muttered that after using his magic on the Guardian and multiple clones, he was practically running on fumes. Being outnumbered only made things worse. He figured the only thing he had left now was his words. He called them by name one by one and mocked them, saying that inventing new spells and rushing into the tower hadn't worked out. They had entered as child geniuses and stayed as washed-up losers. He told them it must be humiliating to serve as logs that kept the tower's machine running day after day, and swore he would sooner die than become one of them. One of them shouted for him to shut up, saying none of the factions had scouted him, which made him colorless just like them. Julius roared back that he was Julius Reinberg, and he would use anything and anyone to climb the tower and succeed Great Mage Elfaria. He said that when that day came, he would look down with disdain at all who had tossed him aside, and if it meant reaching his goal, he would even use a Magiavander. He told them he would use the three of them to get ahead, but in his eyes they were worthless, less than nothing. The three grew furious and attacked together. Just as their strike was about to land, Will appeared and blocked it. He turned to Julius and asked if he was all right, saying he had just been attacked by a group of high mages and thought they might be after Julius too, so he had come with Kiki to find him. Julius demanded to know why Will had saved him. Will told him they had each other's backs in the dungeon, and Julius had also helped him master Whis. Julius shouting and asking if he had already forgotten what happened at the Grand Magic Festival. Was he stupid? Will only smiled and admitted that maybe he was. He was the kind of fool who took a shine to anyone who showed him kindness. The words hit Julius like a blow. For a moment Anna's shadow seemed to fall over Will, dredging up memories Julius thought buried. Without warning, Julius struck Will and shouted that he hated him, his face flushing as he repeated the words. Their clash ended abruptly because the three high mages were already preparing to cast again. Will braced to block and told Julius to stay behind him. Then a shroud of mist surged forward, coiling around the high mages until their strength failed and they slipped into unconsciousness. A voice echoed, saying this wasn't how magic should be used and asking if the academy had taught them anything. Will was shocked and asked who she was. The woman said her name was Saridwin and thanked them for the entertaining display of adolescent drama. In return, she asked if they would let her be their teacher. Will was speechless, while Julius muttered that he had heard the name before. Saridwin was one of the 7 wonders of the academy, along with the Watchers. Rumors said she snatched students at night for experiments. They called her the Iron Witch. Saridwin laughed off the gossip and warned them not to trust idle whispers. She said she sought only promising students to temper and guide, and judged the 2 of them worthy. She revealed she had been watching far longer than they realized. Then she flew toward them and pulled them along, promising to explain later and warning that the Institute's lackeys were closing in. She told them to play along and pretend just for now. After arriving at a certain place, Saridwin welcomed Julius and Will and said this was her humble abode. Once inside, she told them to make themselves at home. She cast a spell that summoned food before them, noted the hour was late, and suggested they sit down for dinner, assuring them they would love her homemade cooking. Julius scoffed that no one would eat anything conjured by a shady witch, but he stopped mid-sentence when he saw Will begin to eat. Julius shouted at Will, asking what he was doing. Will answered that Kiki had said it was fine to eat, and that was enough for him. Julius turned to Saridwin and asked her to explain what the place was. Saridwin replied it was a secret haven Sarah had created, hidden away in the first stratum. She said she was borrowing it for a while, with permission, of course. Then she added that Sarah was her apprentice, and the revelation surprised them both. Julius asked what she was trying to achieve by exploiting the place and called her an old dope. Will turned to him and said this woman had just saved them back there, and that as Sarah's teacher she'd already done more than enough to earn their trust. Julius grew angry and shouted that Saridwin could be an assassin from the Institute pretending to be on their side. Even if she wasn't, he argued, what powerful mage would ever offer help for free? For all they knew, the rumors could be true, and they might be subjects for her next experiments. Saridwin smiled and called it an ordeal. She said mistrust was often the sign of an excellent mage, but this was too much. Then she summoned many spells around them and told them to look. If she so inclined, she could bring them to their knees in 2 seconds. She admitted this might not be the best way to prove herself, but maybe it would convince them to give her the benefit of the doubt. She smiled again and asked them to trust her, saying that if she harbored any ill will toward them, she would have already devoured them whole. At that, Will and Julius fell silent and immediately softened their stance. Julius said it was fine and asked what Sir Ridwan wanted with Will. He warned her that if she intended to keep Will in the dark, she could forget about being his teacher. The words struck Will, yet Julius turned on him, calling him a dimwit and warning him not to misunderstand. He declared he was the one using Will, and that he'd be damned if he let some suspicious witch steal him away without putting up a fight. Sir Ridwan said that was fine, his wish would be honored. She added she knew a little about Wiss, which was one reason she had come. She thought she might be of some assistance. The second reason was that she'd noticed certain attitudes within the Institute. A force inside the organization was attempting to pin Will down in a less than pleasant way. Hearing that, Will asked if by force she meant Kreutz. At the Institute building, Charles reported to Kreutz that there was no sign of Will or Julius. According to the reports, an unknown entity seemed to have intervened during their capture. Enraged, Kreutz ordered a thorough search immediately. There was no record of them leaving in the first stratum log, which meant they were still there, and he demanded they be found at once. Charles asked cautiously why Kreutz would risk rousing Grand Mage Alfaria's antipathy merely to capture Will. Kreutz answered he could not allow the war-crazed factions of the tower to get hold of him. Kreutz said the power was held should be effective and widespread, like the Mage Killer. He admitted he did not know what body had produced it, but the Mage Killer's potency was undeniable, a weapon capable of being mass-produced and wielded by simple monsters, making even the weakest mages battle-ready. He declared this was the pinnacle their world should strive for: strength in numbers, with efficiency as king. Even the power of an almighty five could not hope to stand against such a celestial host. What they needed was not one solitary supreme, but uniform excellence. One day, anyone would be able to wield Wiss, and doing what was necessary to realize that day was critical. He was certain the key lay in Will Serfort. They had to seize him and open him to find it. Charles was shocked. Realizing this was the side of Kreutz neither the factions nor the Magia Vander knew, the side of the demented dissector. As Kreutz held the heart of a monster he had dissected, he told Charles to notify the factions that Mage Killer strategies would soon be ready for implementation, for he now had a good grasp of it. Charles thought that if Grand Mage Alfaria discovered this, the Institute would be finished. And just as he turned to leave, he heard Kreutz murmur that the next mystery to unravel was Wiss. Back at Sir Ridwan's humble abode, she told Will and Julius the truth. She had planned to stand by and watch as he opened new horizons with his power, but things had become far too serious for her to remain a spectator. She assured them she had no intention of making him her lab rat, which was why she had chosen this moment to help him. She added that there had also been some begging on Alfaria's part. This shocked Will, and he asked if Alfaria had truly asked her to help him. Sir Ridwan confirmed it, saying that what he chose to do with this information was entirely up to him. Will turned to Julius and said he trusted her, feeling he didn't believe she was lying and as if he had known her for a long time. His thoughts were cut short when Julius told him to do whatever he wanted. Go ahead and get rid of him, added he hadn't planned on helping him forever anyway, and Will shouted back that he was not getting rid of him. Sir Ridwan watched and smiled, thinking they were good friends and would make a great party. She said that now that they were all working together, it was time to strengthen them with some training, Sir Ridwan style. Then she demanded that Will take his top off, and this shocked him. After he did, Will asked Sir Ridwan why he had to be half-naked to train. Julius called her a foul and deviant witch. Sir Ridwan calmly denied it, assuring them there was a reason she had him strip, and with a sly smile she told Will to be a deer and move his hands. Julius said her disgusting behavior proved otherwise. But he choked and fell silent when he saw Will's full body, covered in scars. He recalled rumors about what Will had done to enter the tower, and wondered how much misery he had endured to get here. Sir Ridwan touched the scar on Will's back with her hand and asked if he could tell her where it came from. Will said he thought he'd gotten it protecting Alfaria when they were little. Sir Ridwan slapped his back and said she thought she'd found it. She explained she'd been checking where the key that unlocks the gate might be hidden, and added that she had been watching the two of them train. Pinpointing the need to anchor magic was astute, she said, and the idea to hold and control magic to reach Wiss was correct. She turned to Julius and told him he would make a fantastic mage if he were more honest with himself, though she admitted he was already sensational. Julius snapped that the flattery was transparent and told her to stop. He insisted he was mostly wrong and dared her to say it. Sir Ridwan refused and pointed out one thing he had gotten wrong: Will himself was the anchor. She explained what she meant, Will had already accumulated magic inside his body. The blood of a mage ran through his veins. But Will's case was special. He couldn't expel magical energy. His body hoarded it and stored it deep. His flesh screamed for release. Yet it only stockpiled more as it fed on outside sources, and the truth of that choked Will. She added that his task now was to see if he could draw from the magic stored within himself. In other words, he had to learn to prime on his own. That was his next objective. Will shouted that he couldn't prime his blade without magic from another source, like Julius's spells. Saridwin answered that he could, asking if that wasn't the whole point. Hadn't he already felt the evocation of another power separate from the magic used to prime? Now they would apply that by awakening the miraculous story written in his blood and memories, so he could obtain a new kind of prime that freed him from relying on others' magic. She named it Prime Pathos, a method of priming that pulls from emotion, thought, and feeling. She said she would channel her magic into the key and send him back into the past. When he arrived, he should search for his origins and learn how to recall them. Saridwin began the ritual, speaking oath and bind and conceal, invoking the forbidden sword as he retraced his past and calling the keyhole to reveal itself in the witch's name. Then she shouted, "Open Tob Wistoria." A luminous, ethereal form detached from Will's physical body and took the shape of his spiritual essence. The radiant being descended into the spell as a kaleidoscope of memories swirled around him like whispers from the past. The scene shifted to Will as a child, Elfaria standing before him warning that the woods were dangerous, urging him to hold her hand so they would be safe, promising she would protect him. On the other side, Will's body lay on a bed. Julius, worried, asked Saridwin what was going on since it had been 4 whole days and Will hadn't shown any sign of waking. Saridwin answered that he was immersed in a dream, that with her magic she had given him a small push into his past so he could try to recall his own history. Julius asked, "He's dreaming about his past and supposed to gain some new power by remembering it. Is she sure that will work?" Saridwin admitted the truth. She was not sure. Swords were Finn's area and Finn's methods had merit. But to keep the balance they needed a different approach. There was a history buried deep inside Will, an intersection where wand and sword met. He would need to find that beginning, and in that search perhaps one day locate his origins. Inside the memory, young Will watched his small hands and feet and thought they looked tiny. Elfaria noticed his stare and asked if something was wrong. Will felt like he had slipped back in time and wondered whether it was real, whether he was actually in his past, or if Elfaria's magic had sent him there. He told himself no mage could turn back the clock, so maybe this was only a memory or a dream. Elfaria hugged him and told him to look at her, then teased that he had been thinking about some other girl. Will said that was just how he helped his father. Elfaria called him a liar and accused him of two-timing her, swearing she would never forgive him. Will was surprised at how willful she had been as a child. The Elfaria he knew now seemed almost a paragon by comparison. He asked how to make her forgive him. She said he needed to give her a hug, and she added that he should pat her head too. After a pause, he hugged her. The motion unlocked a memory. He had done that many times to cheer her up. Elfaria pulled his hand and stood, saying her willpower was charged and they should move. They had a monster to deal with. Will protested that they might get hurt. He knew she was strong, but he was no mage and worried something could go wrong. Elfaria brushed it off and said they would be fine. She had their favorite book and it would give them the confidence to face the beast. She promised to protect him. Will remembered how scared he had been as a child and how Elfaria had always defended him. He wondered when their roles had flipped and when she had started relying on him. They walked into the woods while something watched them from the shadows. Elfaria said people and monsters were fleeing a place called Regard because of the war, and she guessed the forest creature had come from there. Will remembered coming to this wood 10 years earlier, behind the orphanage. Then a monster leapt from the undergrowth and Elfaria shoved Will out of the way. Will stared at the attacker. Not a wolf, not a normal beast, but a mage-made mana creature, wounded and frantic, maybe fleeing the war. The creature roared. Elfaria ordered Will behind her and began to cast a spell, Ars Waste, telling him to stay back. Will watched as Elfaria split into many clones. He marveled at her command of magic at such a young age. The clones fired spells, but the creature reflected them. Ice shards shot back, striking the clones and even hitting Will, sending him crashing to the ground. Realizing the creature could reflect magic, Will told Elfaria to run. Elfaria refused, shouting that she wasn't afraid and that she would protect him. Fear froze Will for a moment, but guilt and determination soon pushed him forward, and he ran toward her. Elfaria unleashed more spells, but they were reflected again. As the reflected magic came rushing back at her, Will threw himself in front of the attack and took the hit to protect her. Will fell to the ground, and Elfaria desperately screamed for him to stay awake. Will's vision slowly faded as consciousness slipped away. Before blacking out completely, a deep female voice called for him to awaken. Steam instantly began rising from Will's body as pain flared through him. It felt like his flesh was burning, like his entire body was about to explode. At the same time, he could feel himself being forged into a sword. In that moment, Will awakened the origin power of primed Tiras Whis. A freezing aura erupted from his body as a massive ice sword slowly took shape in his hand. The monster immediately charged at him, but Will rushed forward without hesitation and unleashed a devastating slash. Even so, the monster blocked it with ease. Elfaria quickly stepped beside him and channeled her magic into his sword. Then, with one final strike, the two attacked together and unleashed a blast of ice powerful enough to freeze the monster solid in an instant. Lying on the ground, Elfaria smiled and told him that this was his magic. As Will's consciousness slowly faded again, only one thought remained. This was where it all began, a memory with her he would never forget. Scene shifted to Saridwin's room. When Will came to, he was greeted by Julius and Kiki staring down at him. Julius snapped that he should hurry and get dressed. He had been out for 6 days and the second blooms were about to start. Will clenched his fist, feeling the change of power within him. Saridwin asked whether he had found the source of the magic anchored inside him and whether he was able to recall his history. Will answered calmly that he had. Saridwin smiled and told him to claim his power and write himself a new story of wand and sword. The scene shifted to the hall where the second bloom was held. Kreutz said he could not believe they would select mages who had only just graduated from the academy. He understood they needed fresh blood, but the standards of the faction seemed far too lax. Sarah offered her congratulations to everyone and told them they could now join their factions. She added that it looked about time to wrap up this year's second bloom. Colette and Wignall wondered where Will and Julius were. If they did not hurry, they would lose their chance. From the sidelines, Kreutz raised his voice, saying it was a waste of time to wait any longer. He imagined they had failed to devise a viable strategy and had run away with their tails between their legs. Those who fled from the fire of innovation did not have what it took to climb the tower. But he assured them that the Upper Institute would see to it they were taken care of. At that moment, the sound of crashing doors drew everyone's attention. Will and Julius entered and apologized for being late. They said they had come to participate in the second bloom. Colette and Wignall were relieved, while Kreutz shouted that these lab rats were giving him quite the hassle. His test remained the same. He needed to prove he had what it took to be a wand and asked Will and the Magiavander if they had any objections. One of the Magiavander replied they had none, and Will said it was fine by him. Beside him, Julius wondered if he was serious. He thought he should lend Will a bit of his magic while no one was looking. His thoughts were cut short when a spell activated beneath him. Just as he wondered if he was receiving a blessing, Elfaria called his name and said she bestowed upon him a blessing from the Ice faction. She thanked him for lending Will a helping hand and told him it was time to believe in what he could do. He fell silent for a moment, then turned to Will and told him not to waste the time and effort he had put into helping him. Will thanked him for the support and prepared to show what he could do. Meanwhile, Saridwin sat watching Will with an enigmatic gaze. Her voice was soft and ethereal as she said a path in his blade had already been opened through her magic. Now he should show her and open her eyes to this new world of the sword. In his mind, Will thought of a single book. All he needed was to open it, mark the page, read the memory, reach deep into his own story, and pull out what he needed. Then he shouted Prime Pathos. Tiras Whis reloaded and summoned a mighty sword. Colette said it looked like the Sword of Light, but then realized it was ice this time. Kreutz was shocked, saying it was impossible that Will had activated Whis by himself. Will raised the sword and with a single swing cut down the summoned beasts. The crowd was astonished, realizing it was not as strong as a prime triggered by an outside source, but it carried the force of a mid-grade spell. As Will fought another beast, he thought he had to take his memories and feelings and pour them into his sword. Elfaria was excited to see his strength, and Zio shouted that this was what he liked to see. Saridwin praised him, saying it was wonderfully done and full marks. Then a voice spoke from behind her, saying he had respected her wishes and watched in silence as she pushed Will up into the tower, but he had not expected things to go so smoothly. The voice belonged to Finn, who called her Headmaster Cauldron. Saridwin told him to call her by her real name when she was in this form. He had no idea how taxing it was to cast aging magic on oneself. She asked Finn what he was doing there, since she thought only mages were allowed in the tower. Finn replied that it was funny coming from her, the ageless witch. Saridwin told him she had noticed his kind of magic working behind the scenes. She figured the dwarves could not have gotten their hands on a Wist gem without his help. Finn admitted he was a new wielder of the fifth source and asked her to forgive him for giving a little gift to someone so important. He explained that Will was still a work in progress. The magic force he needed to trigger a reload on his own wasn't enough, so the Sword of Wis would cover what he lacked. Wis had once placed a heavy burden on Will, turning his hair white and making him forget things. But after 6 years of growth at the academy, Finn said he could finally teach him what he knew. Whether Will would be able to reveal the unknown she sought, only time would tell. Seeing his summoned beasts destroyed one after another left Kreutz losing control. He shouted that this could not be happening and kept repeating no. On another side, someone from the Earth faction said Will had done it, that he had vanquished the mana beasts. From the Dark faction, one remarked that his strength, no being akin to dwarves, could have shown such magic. After killing the beast, Will's sword returned to normal. He figured priming on his own clearly drained him more than priming with someone else's magic. His thoughts were cut short when Kreutz shouted that he did not care what Will had just done. He said Will would get no recognition from him, because that was not magic. Sarah asked if he was not being unreasonable, but Kreutz answered back that he was not. He said they wanted him to recognize a being they knew nothing about, one they had not studied, and still called themselves mages. How could they know his sword was not just a magic item? The only tools allowed in the bloom were wands. He insisted they must examine Will Serfort closely to make sure he was following the rules. One of the Magi of Ander agreed he had a point, while someone from the Earth faction asked what if they considered his blade a wand. From the Dark faction, another said that whatever the case, Will was indeed special, and they must be diligent. Julius grew angry, saying that after everything Will had done, he could not believe they were still arguing. Sarisa said it showed just how much of an anomaly Will really was. Not even the high mages of the factions could agree on what to do with him. She thought the only ones who could bring everyone into line were the Magi of Ander. At least they would hear grumbling from Kreutz, but if Elfaria spoke up for Will, others would see it as favoritism. She needed to find a way to pull one of the other Magi of Ander onto their side before Elfaria lost her temper. Suddenly, Zio started to laugh, saying they were all talk and no action. He said they needed a simple way to figure out what this kid was about, and he had just the thing. He called Will a twerp and told him he had one shot. If he survived, he would get the recognition he needed. Then Zio cast a high-grade thunder spell with a short incantation at Will. Elfaria shouted for Will to run, but the spell was fast and shot straight toward him. For a moment, Will thought he could not defend against it. He wondered if this was the end of the road. A huge explosion shook the arena, leaving everyone shocked and worried for Will. Zio watched the smoke, and when it cleared, Will was still standing, gripping a sword that had absorbed the thunder magic. The crowd was stunned to see his blade transformed into a thunder sword. Finn laughed, saying Will had eaten the spell, primed the bolt as soon as it made contact, and cut its force in half. Saridwin noted that of course Will could not take the full brunt of Zio's spell without some shock, but he had done what was asked and survived a near indefensible attack. Zio laughed loudly and called Will insane. He couldn't believe the kid had lived through one of his spells. He turned to Magi of Ander and Kreutz, called them idiots, and demanded to know if they'd seen it. The brat had taken a hit from a Magi of Ander and was still standing. What more proof did they need? He shouted for Will to come up. He had earned his recognition and didn't belong downstairs. Kreutz stepped in and told Zio to hold on. He argued that they couldn't undermine the sanctity of the bloom with such a careless method of recognition. Zio suddenly appeared right in front of him and told him fine. Then he asked if the Honorable Paramount Kreutz could do what a little kid had just done. If he couldn't, everyone would see what he was really worth. The threat left Kreutz terrified. He stammered that he recognized Will Serfort as worthy of the tower and eligible to join a faction. The announcement brought relief to Colette, Cian, Wignall, Julius, and Lahanna, knowing their friend was worthy of the tower. In that epic moment, Elfaria ran from her throne, and hugged Will, saying she was thankful he had done it and sorry she could not help him. Will told her not to be sorry, but to be happy, because she had waited so long and he had finally made it. From above, Sarah said she was almost sure she did not need to ask, but which faction would he join? Will declared loudly that he would join Elfaria's faction, but before he finished, Zio's hand grabbed his shoulder and pulled him into a tight hold. Zio shouted that Will was coming with him, which made Elfaria furious. She told him to read the room, calling him an idiot and saying she ought to freeze him to death. Will begged her to calm down and asked Zio to let him go. He appreciated the sentiment, but he was going with Elfaria. Before he could finish, Zio cast a lightning spell on him, knocking him unconscious. Zio then said Will wanted to join the Thunder faction, so that settled it. Elfaria shouted she had enough of his antics, and demanded he be given back. At the sidelines, Colette asked what was going on down there. Rose told her it looked like Will was being headhunted. She then asked with excitement if maybe the Earth faction should jump in too. She had seen how powerful Will was, and having him would be good for the faction. She promised it was not because she wanted to be close to him in the tower. In the arena, Elfaria asked Zio why he was doing this. If he truly wanted Will, he would have scouted him from the start. Zio told her he had not wanted him then, but now he did. He said he did not put chains on desire, calling it one of the little maxims he lived by. Riches, drink, woman, man, whatever he wanted, he took. That was what he did. Hearing this left everyone shocked, agreeing he was an absolute savage. Elfaria told him she had no intention of letting anyone take Will away from her. She made it clear she would annihilate anyone who tried. Zio laughed, and proposed a fight between them, with the winner claiming Will. Elfaria said it sounded perfect. But Sarah cut in, saying she would not let two Magiavander fight over a boy. She told them both to knock it off. Carriot asked why even bother stopping these hotheads, since any intervention would only drag out this already drawn-out charade. Eleanor said letting the sloth and the savage kill each other would only do them good. Finn laughed and said the Magiavander were free to act however they wanted. Elfaria brought Will to Sarisa and told her to take care of him, then turned back to face Zio. She asked what the signal was to start, but Zio said they didn't need one, they had already begun. Julius shouted at Will to wake up and stop the fight, but then he heard a rumble. Looking toward Elfaria, he saw her casting Flurzel Caldinia. A cathedral of ice slammed into Zio, covering the battlefield. Everyone was stunned. She was throwing out big spells right from the start. But Zio moved in a flash, appearing behind her and saying she had missed him. He cast Thundering Howl, a devastating lightning strike that made Julius fear for Elfaria. Yet the attack only hit one of her clones. In an instant she had summoned copies that surrounded Zio. Julius was shocked, asking when she had done it. Sarisa explained she had summoned them after blocking his view with her cathedral of ice. All she needed was a split second. Elfaria was the fastest caster in the tower, not known for speed, but for ruthless precision. Hovering in the air, Elfaria declared that Will was hers and unleashed a barrage of ice projectiles from every clone. The air erupted as the blasts rained down. On the sidelines, Cian said she had just cast a high-grade ice barrage without incantation, something that normally required a full chant. Julius added it had taken everything he had to cast that spell on the 11th floor, while she spoke it into existence. The scale of her power left the others speechless. Elfaria cast another spell, crystalline ice exploding across the battlefield. Carriot remarked that she was pulling out all the stops. Logwell said her icicles were not only powerful but swift and accurate, giving the Ice Maiden the upper hand. Finn reminded them not to forget the other beast in the cage, Zio. And as he said, after the relentless barrage, Zio still stood unharmed. He asked if that was all she had, then in a flash appeared behind her, grabbed her head, and cast Volgon Float. The blast destroyed every clone at once. Thinking she was exposed, he lunged at her body, but it was another clone. The real Elfaria had been above him all along. Ceridwen noted that every exchange had been a ploy to buy her time to escape above and prepare a final assault, all while maintaining clones accurate enough to fool a Magiavander. Eleanor added that Elfaria had even hidden herself to avoid search spells. From above, Elfaria taunted Zio, asking if he was having fun playing with her toys. Then she cast a massive circle that covered the battlefield, Clone Chain Full Connect. The ground shook as the spell detonated in a chain of blasts, sweeping the arena in a giant storm of ice. High mages shouted to deploy barriers, saving Rose and Colette from the impact. Rose noticed Elfaria had used her clones to amplify the spell's power, doubting even a Magiavander could survive it. Yet Zio still stood, untouched. He said playing with dolls didn't cut it for him, then pulled out a halberd and hurled it at her, saying he wanted the real thing. Elfaria dodged easily, but without realizing, Zio was already standing on the halberd midair. He punched her hard, sending her crashing down. As she tried to rise, he appeared again and struck her, throwing her into the wall and making her cough blood. On the sidelines, Colette said she didn't understand. His attacks were all close range. He wasn't fighting like a mage at all. She asked if he was a knight enchanter like Lehana. Lehana replied no, that all he was doing was releasing raw magic energy. At that moment Guilford, the Thunder faction adjutant, appeared and told her she was right. He said this was the pinnacle, what the Thunder faction lived by. Great Mage Zio didn't rely on complicated spells. He let the energy flow, turning it into pure movement. It was a technique that inspired dread in all who saw it. Wrathbolt. Logwell said Wrathbolt might be the only thing faster than the Ice Maiden's cast speed. Kreutz, terrified, said Zio's power defied logic, calling it monstrous. Cian added that Zio Thor Zeus Rainbolt was showing exactly why he was a Magiavander, the Thor Zeus Wand of Thunder. As the clash continued, Ceridwen asked Finn who he thought would win. Finn calmly answered Zio. He explained Elfaria had created 12 spells on her own, proving her skill, but Zio was the king of practice. He was second only to Eren in dungeon progression, having reached 48 floors himself. His mastery of applied magic was undeniable. Finn said if Will was a sword, then Zio was a wand, and honestly, Will might be better served under Zio's guidance than Elfaria's. Carriot remarked that if this stayed a long-range fight, Elfaria might have a chance, but as long as Zio kept it close, he would dominate. He thought the victor was already clear. Meanwhile, Eleanor clearly wasn't pleased, letting out an irritated growl. Philvis asked Lafia why their great mage seemed so disconsolate. Lafia explained it was simple. Eleanor had once lost to Elfaria in a contest of ice magic. As much as she hated to see the Ice Maiden win, she didn't want her to lose either. She was stuck between a glacier and a hard place. Eleanor snapped at them, demanding to know who gave them permission to talk. Meanwhile, Elfaria lay helpless at the bleachers, blood running from her head and mouth. Julius shook Will, begging him to wake up. Was he just going to lie there while Elfaria lost to that madman? He was the only one who could give her the push she needed. In her despair, Elfaria caught sight of Will's goggles, and it sparked courage inside her. Zio brushed back his hair with a sneer, saying she was out of tricks and it was time to claim his prize. But before he could finish, an attack shot past him, cutting his cheek and leaving blood dripping. The sudden strike shocked everyone. Ceridwen turned to Finn, remarking that Elfaria was still in the fight, just as tenacious as Will. Beaten and bloodied, Elfaria still stood, shouting at Zio that he wasn't taking anything. Will was not his to claim. Zio laughed, saying the Ice Witch lived and was feistier than ever. He asked what had sparked this stunning transformation. Elfaria shouted back one word: love. Will had risked his life to protect her, kept his promise, and now it was her turn. Zio laughed, calling her a fool, then told her to show him what her love could do. He charged with Wrathbolt, boosting his speed and unleashing a rapid assault no mage could counter. But Elfaria blocked him with ice magic, trapping him in place. Zio demanded to know what it was. Elfaria explained it was a barrier spell, painful to cast, draining half her energy, and requiring countless spells to set up. On the sidelines, Wignall said the barrage of high-grade spells had been for this barrier. Eleanor said she had fallen for the same trick once. It was Elfaria's secret weapon. The closer you got, the more frozen you became. The savage's speed had become his own worst enemy. Elfaria told Zio she had first created the spell because Will was too shy to sit still and let her hug him. Now she had used it on Zio, and he was stuck. Zio sneered, calling her a nasty witch. Elfaria clenched her fist and said he could call her whatever he liked, but Will was hers, and she would protect him like her own bride. She unleashed a powerful punch that sent Zio crashing into the wall. As Zio stumbled out of the rubble, he began chanting a long incantation that shook the air around him. Carriot realized he was finally done playing games. Eleanor remarked that it would take an unimaginable amount of magic to break through Elfaria's barrier. Yet Zio was reckless enough to try anyway. Black storm clouds crackling with lightning began forming overhead. The others quickly realized Zio was casting a supreme-grade spell. In response, Elfaria answered with a powerful incantation of her own. Zio destroyed Elfaria's clones as he chanted, while Elfaria kept creating more to maintain her spell. Philvis pointed out that it was a textbook example of harmonic casting, fighting, moving, and chanting all at the same time. Lightning lit up the sky as Will snapped awake. Realizing a massive battle was unfolding, he shouted for Elfaria to wait, but both of them had already finished their spells. Zio summoned a lightning-covered minotaur wielding a massive battle axe, while Elfaria summoned a giant ice phoenix. The two mighty beasts charged at each other, and the clash of their immense powers became unavoidable. Lafia and Philvis quickly raised barriers to protect the battlefield. The impact shook the entire tower. Even Edward and Werkner felt it from the city and immediately realized the Magia Vander were behind it. The battlefield was torn apart, but thanks to the barriers, no lives were lost. From the wreckage, Zio and Elfaria were pinned against walls, bodies battered and broken. Zio told her they had both landed good hits, admitting he hadn't thought she had it in her. Elfaria said the same back. Zio added the last spell had drained him, but the fight wasn't over. Elfaria agreed. They pushed themselves up, stepping forward to finish it. Carriot and Eleanor rose from their seats, frustrated, realizing this had gone too far. In an instant, they appeared in the battlefield to stop the duel. Elfaria told Eleanor to move aside, but Eleanor said time was up. Zio told Carriot to get lost, but Carriot said they had made a spectacle of themselves and neither had won. Then a thunderous voice suddenly cut through the battlefield and ordered them to stop. It was Aaron, the king of the Magia Vander. He declared that he would not tolerate any more fighting between Magia Vander. Zio angrily called him an ancient white beard, while Elfaria argued that his peacemaking meant nothing until Will's placement was decided. Zio agreed and insisted the only solution was to defeat her. Aaron simply smiled and suggested settling it with rock paper scissors. The absurd proposal left everyone stunned. He added that if they tried any other method, Will would fall under his placement instead. Left with no choice, the two reluctantly agreed. The match dragged on through 299 straight ties until the 300th round, when Elfaria chose scissors and Zio chose rock, leaving Elfaria screaming in defeat. Zio proudly boasted about his victory in front of his faction members, while Elfaria sulked on the ground, crying in frustration. Zio wrapped an arm around Will's shoulder and declared that the winner claimed the prize. Elfaria immediately clung to Will, crying that she didn't want to let him go. Will held her tightly as he realized he wasn't the only one who had been alone all this time. Elfaria had climbed the tower by herself and waited for him for 6 long years, and he couldn't make her wait any longer. In a gentle voice, he told Elfaria that they would see each other again someday, and hearing that seemed to ease her sadness a little. Sarisa appeared and pulled her away, telling her not to embarrass herself any further since Aaron's word was absolute. Elfaria kept whining and crying the entire time Sarisa dragged her away. After she left, Will lowered his head in silence. Zio stepped closer and said he hadn't expected Will to come quietly. Will coldly told Zio that if he refused, Elfaria would come charging back out and only end up hurting herself, so he asked him not to fight her anymore. If Zio couldn't promise that, then Will declared he would take him down right there and go with Elfaria instead. Zio burst out laughing, saying Will had nerve and admitted he liked that. Zio then gave him his blessing and declared that from this day forward, Will belong to the Thunder faction. He warned him to brace himself because he was in for a rude awakening. Will answered without hesitation, his eyes filled with determination as he called him sir. The next day in the tower's first stratum interim room, Julia sat beside Will and grumbled that the whole thing was ridiculous. After making Grand Mage Elfaria cry like that, Will still ended up joining the Thunder faction instead of the Ice faction. Julia snapped that Will had caused nothing but trouble. Elfaria had nearly stormed off screaming about quitting everything, and it had taken the entire faction to calm her down, while Will could only respond with an awkward smile and apology. Then he turned to Lehana, noticing she looked exhausted, and asked if something was wrong. She told him that now he was part of the Thunder faction, he would find out soon enough. Colette asked if anyone knew what the deal was with this guidance session. Rose said it seemed all the new mages who had made it into the tower had been called to attend. Cian added he was sure it was just an assembly going over the rules. Wignall agreed. saying life in the tower was bound to be different from the academy. Then Sarah entered the classroom, congratulating them on their faction placements and asking if any mage had been left behind. She said she expected no less from the generation of disquiet. Even the stragglers from the first bloom had received blessings. She wanted to be the first to offer them a hearty well done, reminding them that within each of them lay endless potential. She explained that the guidance session was usually an annual assembly to go over the do's and don'ts of the tower. But this year was different. Instead of guidance, she would be assigning them a highly confidential order. Each mage would be tasked with investigating their factions thoroughly, paying close attention to conversations, actions, and records. If they found anything suspicious, they were to investigate and report it to her. Julius asked what kind of order she was talking about. Sarah answered that the tower had been looking into the attack on Terminaria and had found evidence that could only belong to a mage of the tower. The information shocked the students. She added that, in other words, there was a traitor among the high mages. The classroom fell silent at the revelation. Then Colette asked her what exactly she meant by traitor. Suddenly, a cat leapt into the center, offering to explain what had happened. In an instant, the cat transformed into a pervy old witch, who revealed that on the night of Terminaria the gate to the tower had been opened, something only a mage of the tower could do. Rose wondered who she was, and the witch introduced herself as Sarah's gracious and humble master, Miss Ceridwen. She explained that the gate into the tower could only be opened by a registered high mage. It had not been broken, it was simply unlocked. No monster could have managed such a feat. If a Dino-Boros wielding the mage killer had infiltrated the tower, the situation would have been far worse. Add in a pincer attack from the Devende, and even the Magiavander would have been at risk. On that day, Rigarden had truly been on the brink of collapse, and not by coincidence. Sarah stepped in, saying that a nefarious actor had brought Rigarden to the edge of ruin. Thanks to Will's efforts, the assault had been thwarted, but the issue remained. The gate had been opened from within, and senior leadership was determined to find out who had done it. Pointing at the students, Sarah declared their task: to infiltrate their factions and investigate anyone suspicious. Emma Cleaver of the Wind faction questioned whether such an important mission could really be entrusted to them. Mike Mayus of the Dark faction reminded everyone that they had only just graduated from the academy. Cian assumed that Sarah at least had an idea of who their enemy was. Ceridwen answered that they believed it to be the Tome of Ruin, Gotia. 10 years ago, their world had nearly been annihilated when the Magiavander were killed, the day of Doom's descent. Gotia had orchestrated that war, and they suspected its remnants were behind this. Hearing this, Will thought back to the beast he and Elfaria had fought 10 years ago, a mana creature that had fled the war in the city. He wondered if that mage and the Headless were somehow connected to Gotia. His thoughts were cut short when Sarah warned that if they were truly dealing with Gosha's remnants, they would need to carry out the probe with utmost discretion. As a mediator belonging to no faction, she implored them, for the good of their world, they must find the traitor. Every mage in the tower was a suspect. When class ended, the students walked the corridor, speculating about the traitor. Cian noted that it was not the kind of order he had expected so soon after joining. Colette admitted she was still in shock, unwilling to believe a traitor lurked in the tower. Wignall said he could not bring himself to suspect his comrades. The elves were far too dignified to commit such a crime. Cian sneered, asking if that mattered unless Wignall wanted to be the only one to skirt the order. Meanwhile, Lehana asked weakly if they wanted her to investigate the Thunder faction. Will noticed her weary expression and demanded to know what was wrong. She answered that he would find out soon enough. Colette muttered that essentially they were being asked to play spy and root out a traitor. It pained her to pry into her faction's business, but they were the only ones trusted to do the job. Suddenly she shouted that it was time for Team Lehana to start spying. Julius wondered when she had become the leader, while Will told her she was right, they should do their best. The following day, inside the second stratum of the Earth faction, Colette was dressed like a queen and seated on a throne. Around her the old men went wild, shouting that at long last their prayers had been answered. They declared that Colette, lawyer rightful heir to the lawyer family, was officially one of them. Fulluin added that earth magic was scarce in the tower, and with all these geezers around they lacked a feminine touch. Hammond said that for 20 years they had been rolling downhill, but not anymore. Now they had a young lady in their ranks. Wargans shouted that even better, this lass carried the blood of a house that had once produced a Magiavander. The crowd erupted, chanting that their time had come. In the middle of the commotion, one old man blew a kiss at Rose, his granddaughter, thanking her for guiding Colette to them. Rose replied weakly that she had not guided anyone. Colette had chosen to enter the tower herself. Colette turned to Rose, asking what in the tower was going on. Rose explained that they simply expected great things from her. To them, she was their brilliant Colette, their Earth princess. Watching the scene unfold, Colette thought that forget being a spy. She felt more like the founder of some strange religion. Meanwhile, at the third stratum of the ice faction, the atmosphere was tense. Elfaria, sunk in sadness, kept repeating that she needed Will with her. Sarisa shouted at her to stop the hysterics, forcing her to get up and greet the new recruits like a true Magiavander. Julius held his head, muttering that this was why he had told that idiot Will to join the ice faction. He stepped forward and addressed Elfaria, saying he had heard much about her from Will. By Will's word, she was a beautiful, kind soul for whom he cared deeply. It was a shame Will could not be there, but Julius believed Will would want her to present herself as the noble, dignified mage he knew her to be. In his mind, he hoped this approach would work. Slowly, Elfaria rose and sat down, her demeanor shifting. Acting like a saint, she smiled and offered congratulations to the recruits for joining the ice faction, wishing them blessed waters and brilliant ice. Then she turned to Julius, telling him that he was perhaps the most promising among them. They expected much from him, and if he would lend her his strength, she asked him to help reclaim what had been stolen, help her take back Will. Hearing this, Julius began to wonder if he had chosen the wrong faction. At the sixth stratum of the elf faction, Wignall knelt in the center of the room. Eleanor sat on a throne with Lafia and Filvis standing at her sides. Lafia reminded him that 6 years ago he had left Alfskager to attend the academy. Filvis added that he had failed to skip a grade and had ended up the only elf stuck in a classroom. Wignall lowered his head, listening as the elves whispered judgment. They called him a disgrace to the royal house of Linder and nothing but a stain on Eleanor's name. Hearing this, Wignall thought he couldn't take it. He felt trapped, like he was in an interview where he wasn't allowed to speak. It was pure torture. Suddenly, a collar was thrown at him. Eleanor ordered him to put it on. Wignall stammered, asking if it was a gift and thanking her for it. Eleanor immediately shot the idea down coldly, saying it was obviously a collar. She explained it was the perfect tool for keeping idiots who shamed their people in line. With that around his neck, he wasn't getting away from her. She asked if he understood, leaving Wignall staring at her in confusion. At the fifth stratum of the fire faction, Cariot cast a fire spell at his new recruits, leaving Cian sprawled helpless. Smirking, he told them he apologized for the explosive welcome, but explained it was the quickest way to test them. They might not understand yet, but this was an initiation by fire, meant to weed out the weak from the strong. He reminded them that many promising mages had been lost during Terminaria, Raj included. He had hoped this year's seedlings would make worthy replacements, but it seemed he had been too hopeful. Cariot then turned to Logwell, instructing him to take care of the recruits. At that moment, Cian shouted for him to wait and demanded that the initiation continue. He insisted he had to become stronger than that buffoon and would do whatever it took. Hearing this, Cariot smirked, remarking that perhaps he had spoken too soon. This year's harvest might turn out to be the most bountiful yet. Cian smiled, ready to face the initiation. At the fourth stratum of the Thunder faction, Guilford barked at the recruits to keep running and warned them not to slack off. They had to run until they dropped, like maggots collapsing on the track. Lihanna was already worn out. Will asked if she was okay, and she answered weakly that she was fine and told him to keep his eyes forward. Hearing this, Will finally understood what she had meant earlier and wondered what kind of faction made their mages run nonstop as training. His thoughts were cut short when Guilford shouted that they were probably wondering what muscle had to do with magic. The strongest magic came from the strongest body. A mage with a flimsy frame couldn't hope to call thunder as an ally. That was why they ran, like their lives depended on it, like they were fleeing a dungeon beast. While running, Milia asked Algan what lap he was on. Algan said he was on his 80th lap and that Guilford was driving him insane, so he was thinking about picking up the pace. Motivated by the others, Will pushed himself even harder, but behind him Lihanna suddenly collapsed face first onto the track. Guilford walked over and mocked her for sleeping on the track again, saying it wasn't a good look. He stepped on her face and sneered that he could see right through her. She had only tried to play the hero to flirt her way into Zio's favor. Lehana denied it, saying Zio wasn't even her type. Guilford kicked her and shouted that she had better watch her mouth and listen while he was in charge. Nobody got special treatment there. Not even her. He then asked how it felt to be treated like everyone else. Watching this, Algan muttered that Guilford was at it again, torturing the newbies, saying Guilford was the real beast of the fourth stratum. Milia added that he had been extra rough on them for a while now. Poor things. Will suddenly stepped in for Lehana, telling Guilford he would run however many laps she had left so she could rest. Guilford laughed mockingly, saying friendship was forever and that shouldn't make him sick. He immediately ordered him to run 100 laps. Will agreed and ran at full speed. After a few minutes he finished, but Guilford only looked annoyed, declaring that in the Thunder faction they pushed mages to their absolute limit. He ordered him to run another 100 laps. Will ran them, but the moment he finished, Guilford demanded 200 more. Every time Will completed the laps, Guilford added even more until he had run over 500 laps and was completely exhausted. Seeing Will sprawled on the ground, Guilford mocked him, asking if he was already tuckered out and whether he thought that sword made him special. He told Will to think again. Zio didn't care about him at all. On the sidelines, Milia told the others that the newbies didn't realize Guilford would keep making them run until they dropped, so there was no point resisting. Algan admitted Will was something else. It was the first time anyone had broken 1,600 laps. Neru added that it was a new record and pretty cool. At that moment, Zio suddenly grabbed Will by the collar and hauled him up for a spar, warning him not to bore him. Seeing their leader, the Thunder faction members bowed in greeting, while Will smiled awkwardly, wondering how he was supposed to be a spy under these conditions. The scene shifted to a dark and mysterious chamber where masked figures had gathered. They were members of Gotia, a notorious faction of mages responsible for Doomsday. One of them spoke up and asked how the plan was coming along. Another replied that things were going quite well and that they were beginning to pick up the slack from Terminaria. Mars and Headless Failure had cost them precious time, and to make matters worse, the two had become involved in another entirely separate plan. Hearing this, one of them told the others to leave them be. Everything served a single purpose: liberating the true sky. Mages held the key to the heavens of Baal, and they wanted a certain mysterious figure to seize it. Not long after, that mysterious figure stepped into the chamber with a laugh, saying she liked the sound of that. Gotia always got what it wanted. The mysterious girl told them to leave it to her. When she was done, nothing would remain. Alright, that's it for this episode. If you want more, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Peace out.